The storm had rolled in so suddenly it was like the sky itself had decided to make a statement. Rain lashed against the windows of the Greenridge High Auditorium, thunder grumbling low like it was holding its breath. Inside, no one spoke. Students, teachers, board members, all sat with a kind of rigid, electric silence that filled the air thicker than the humidity outside. At the center of it all stood a girl, 17 years old, 5 feet 5, curls pulled back into a defiant bun, and eyes that refused to lower. Amara Johnson didn't look afraid. She looked finished. The principal, Mr. Dalton, stood behind the podium, his knuckles white where he gripped its edge. He cleared his throat for the third time, as though the act of pushing sound out might cleanse the moment of its discomfort. His voice, when it finally came, was tight, like he was chewing through the words. Miss Johnson, your actions today were a direct challenge to the integrity of this institution. You accessed private systems, presented materials that were clearly above your level of authorization, and you. I exposed a flaw, Amara interrupted, calm and clear. I proved that the AI grading model you implemented favors students based on racial and socioeconomic biases. That's not cheating. That's truth. Her voice echoed across the stage. Somewhere in the crowd of students, someone coughed. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One kid whispered, "Damn," under his breath. Principal Dalton's nostrils flared. This was supposed to be a senior project, not a political statement. Amara didn't move. Her laptop was still open beside her, the final slide of her presentation glowing behind her like a challenge. Bias in educational algorithms, the hidden gatekeepers. The data had been solid. The logic, undeniable. She had used the school's own AI grading model to demonstrate exactly how its system ranked students unfairly. Assigning higher predicted scores to students from wealthier zip codes, mostly white, and ranking students like her, black, low income, as underperformers before they even touched a test. She had done what no one expected. She made the system look bad. Worse, she made it look deliberate. Mr. Dalton adjusted his tie, eyes darting to the 3 board members seated beside him, who avoided his glance. You've been warned before, Amara. You've continually shown a lack of respect for school policies. I respect learning, she replied. Not rules that silence people like me. A ripple of energy passed through the auditorium. One of her teachers, Mrs. Green, leaned over to another staff member and whispered something. The same woman who'd once told Amara she was too intense during debate club. Dalton slammed the folder shut. Enough. We've reviewed your conduct. As of this moment, you are officially expelled from Greenridge High School. There it was. A full-body silence fell across the room. No gasp, no outcry. Just the kind of heavy, shocked stillness that happens when the worst thing imaginable plays out exactly how you feared it would. Somewhere in the back row, a hand slowly lowered a cell phone, capturing it all. Amara blinked once. Then she reached over, closed her laptop with deliberate grace, and slid it into her backpack. Her posture didn't shift. Her jaw didn't tremble. She turned to face the crowd, scanning the room as if committing the moment to memory. Every student who looked away, every teacher who refused to meet her eyes, every so-called friend who sat there frozen. She said nothing. And then she walked. Down the stairs, off the stage, and out the auditorium doors. The hallway beyond felt too wide, too clean, too empty. The sound of her sneakers squeaking against the tile seemed louder than thunder. No one followed her. No one tried to stop her. They had watched her be erased, and they said nothing. Outside, the rain greeted her like an old enemy. She walked straight into it. No umbrella. No coat. Just a hoodie soaked through in seconds. Her mother was at work, second shift at the diner. Amara had told her not to come. She didn't want her to see this. By the time she reached the edge of the school grounds, her curls had loosened, her notebook was damp inside her backpack, and her hands shook, not from fear, but fury. She turned down Main Street, past the grocery store that still had a "No Backpacks Allowed" sign in the window, and slipped into the tiny public library. It was mostly empty, except for the familiar creak of the wooden floor and the soft hum of the heating system trying to fight off the wet chill. She dropped onto her usual bench in the back and pulled out her phone. There was only one person she wanted to talk to. Jason. She texted, "It's done. They made it official." His reply came fast. "Where are you?" "Library. Waiting for the rain to stop. Or the world." She set the phone aside and took out the little leather notebook he'd given her 2 months ago, brown cover, gold embossed initials, AJ inside, his messy handwriting, "Use your mind to build your future. And come back to burn the lies down." She stared at the words until they blurred. And then the tears came, slow and quiet, the kind that leak out when you've held too much for too long. No gasping, no sobs. Just water sliding down her cheeks as if it had been waiting for permission. She flipped to a blank page. She wrote. "They erased me. But I am still here. I am not gone. I am building." By the time she looked up again, the rain had slowed. Outside, puddles shimmered in the gray light. She zipped up her hoodie, stood, and walked back into the world. Her path wasn't clear. But it was hers. That night, back home, her mother returned from work soaked and silent. She didn't ask questions. Just dropped her purse, took off her shoes, and sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table. Amara said it first. "They expelled me." Her mother nodded, slow and sad. "I know. They said I was disruptive. That I made the other students uncomfortable." Her mother took a long breath, reached for the cigarette pack she hadn't touched in years, and lit one with shaking hands. "You didn't make them uncomfortable, baby. You made them feel small." Amara looked down. "What do I do now?" Her mother exhaled, smoke curling upward like a ghost. "You leave. You build something so big they can't ignore it. And one day, you come back. Not to prove yourself. To prove they were wrong." And in that moment, Amara Johnson didn't feel expelled. She felt unleashed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? From the moment she could form full sentences, Amara Johnson had questions no one else seemed to be asking. At age 4, she stared out of the bus window on the way to daycare and asked her mother why trees bent in the wind but didn't break. At 5, she took apart an old remote control to see if she could rewire it to work with the TV in her bedroom. At 6, she got caught reading a biology textbook her cousin left on the kitchen table, and not just flipping through it, but understanding it. Her mother, Gloria, a waitress who worked every holiday shift just to keep the lights on, didn't know what to do with a daughter like that. She didn't understand how a child could need so little sleep and ask so many questions. But she knew enough to recognize brilliance when she saw it. And she knew brilliance scared people. Especially in girls. Even more so in black girls. By 2nd grade, Amara was miles ahead of her peers. She tested out of the standard reading curriculum and started sneaking into the middle school library during recess. She didn't raise her hand in class anymore, not because she didn't know the answers, but because she'd learned early that knowing too much made her a target. Once, when she corrected a math teacher's formula on the whiteboard, the woman turned to her and said, "You know, being a smart aleck won't help you make friends." Amara never corrected her again. But she didn't stop learning. Her world became smaller but sharper. The internet became her escape, coding became her therapy, and the back table of the library turned into her sanctuary. By middle school, she had already created an online chatbot that could mimic her teacher's writing styles. She called it Echo. No one knew. No one asked. She stopped trying to be seen. Except by one person. Jason Rivas was the kind of kid who knew how to read a room, not in the usual social way, but in the way someone reads a weather forecast, watching for warning signs, feeling the pressure drop. He'd grown up watching his mom work double shifts cleaning houses, and he understood, instinctively, what silence meant. That was probably why he noticed Amara when no one else did. They met in 7th grade. She was alone at the lunch table with a laptop and 3 open notebooks. He walked over, sat down without a word, and took out his sandwich. "You building Skynet or something?" he asked between bites. She looked up, wary. He smiled. "Just checking. If the robots are gonna rise up, I wanna be on the winning side." Amara cracked a smile, the first real one in days. From then on, they were a quiet duo. Not loud, not showy. They passed notes during assemblies that had more code than words. He once gave her a USB drive for her birthday loaded with every episode of Black Mirror, and she gifted him a script that could auto-organize his music library by tempo. They didn't need to talk about fitting in. They both knew they didn't. Still, Amara's world wasn't kind. At Greenridge Middle, gifted programs didn't look like her. When she walked into the advanced science lab, she was often mistaken for someone's younger sibling. Teachers would pause when calling roll, confused by her presence. "Amara Johnson." "Ha." Didn't expect, they'd trail off. But Amara didn't need their expectations. She had fire in her blood and ambition carved into her bones. She built, she read, she studied. She chased knowledge with the kind of hunger that scared grown men in positions of power. By the time she was 14, she had already outpaced the school's entire STEM curriculum. But instead of skipping her ahead, the school board labeled her a behavioral concern. The real problem wasn't her intellect. It was that she didn't apologize for it. She asked questions in class that made teachers defensive. She challenged the idea that homework was about discipline, not understanding. She questioned why some kids got extra help while others didn't. And worst of all, she asked those questions out loud. By sophomore year, she stopped trying to play nice. She wore her hair natural even when teachers suggested it was distracting. She stopped pretending she needed to be saved. She stopped waiting for approval that would never come. Jason noticed the shift. "You used to care," he said one day after class. She shrugged. "I used to think if I proved myself enough, they'd treat me like I belonged." "You do belong. Not here." But not even Jason knew the full story, how at night, when the world went quiet and her mother finally fell asleep on the couch after a 14-hour shift, Amara would stare at the ceiling and wonder what it would be like to live in a place where she could just be. Not a symbol. Not a problem student. Just a person with a mind that moved faster than her mouth could catch up. She wasn't angry because they misunderstood her. She was angry because they chose not to understand. She had spent years pouring herself into a world that never gave anything back. She applied for every scholarship, entered every science fair, built apps she couldn't even publicly claim because of school policy. But every time she got close to recognition, someone moved the goalposts. Too advanced. Too aggressive. Too outspoken. Too much. By her junior year, the fire inside her had turned to steel. That was when she began building her final project in secret. The AI grading system that Greenridge was so proud of. It looked sleek, fair, objective. But it wasn't. It had patterns, shadows, gaps. She studied its algorithm for 6 months, reverse-engineered the logic, fed it test data under different student profiles. The results were undeniable. White students with the same test scores received higher predicted outcomes. Poor students, black students, assigned lower trajectories based on zip codes and engagement history. It wasn't an error. It was designed that way. So she built her case. Compiled it. Coded a visual model. rehearsed her presentation. And then she waited. The day she stood on that stage, she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't trying to be liked. She was trying to be heard. And when they expelled her, she didn't cry. Because it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The day after her expulsion, the world felt both louder and emptier. The notifications on Amara's phone came like gunfire, buzz after buzz of curious classmates, masked concern, and outright drama. Her name was everywhere. Threads on school forums, blurry screenshots of her final presentation, even a poorly cropped photo of her walking out of the auditorium soaked in rain. But the most painful part wasn't the messages. It was the silence from the people she had trusted. Jason was the only one who showed up that night. He didn't ask for permission. Just knocked once and let himself in like he'd done 100 times before. Amara was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her laptop untouched beside her, screen black. "I brought fries," he said, like it could fix something. Amara looked up. Her face was tired in a way he hadn't seen before. Not physically tired, but the kind that came from realizing you'd been fighting a war no one else even acknowledged. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Why?" Jason dropped the bag on the table. "Because the school might think I'm guilty by association." "They already do." She didn't respond. He sat across from her. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy, like something waiting to crack. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have said something when Dalton shut you down. I should have stood up." "You didn't have to," she said. "No one had to. That's the whole point." Jason clenched his jaw. "I didn't say I didn't want to." They sat like that for a long time. Fries untouched. The soft hum of the refrigerator the only background noise. Eventually, Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. It was a letter from the school board, official, cold, precise. "Will not be eligible for re-enrollment in any district institutions. Final decision is non-negotiable." Jason read it once and then again, slower. "They made sure you couldn't come back. They made sure I wouldn't be hurt again." Her voice was quiet, but there was fire underneath. The kind that doesn't explode, but burns steady. Jason shook his head. "They're scared of you." "They should be," she said. But deep down, even Amara felt the sting of doubt. Not because she regretted what she did, she didn't. But because isolation has a way of distorting even the clearest truth. When you're left alone long enough, you start to wonder if you are the problem. By the end of the week, the story had twisted. The narrative spun around her like barbed wire. Rumors filled the school halls she could no longer walk. "Did you hear she hacked the system to change her grades? I heard she plagiarized everything and blamed racism when she got caught. She thought she was smarter than the school board. How dumb is that?" Jason tried to fight back, but every time he spoke up, he got a warning. From teachers. From the vice principal. Even from his guidance counselor. "They're watching me now," he admitted one night over the phone. "You don't have to defend me," Amara said. "You'll just get pulled down too. Let them try." But she knew better. She knew how easy it was to crush someone who didn't have a name that mattered or a family with connections. They could paint her as the villain and no one would question it, not really. She was expelled now. That gave them permission to forget she had ever mattered. A week later, Amara tried to apply to an alternative high school in the next district. She showed up in a clean hoodie, hair pulled back, notebook in hand. The administrator scanned her paperwork and frowned. "I see you were expelled," he said, eyes not quite meeting hers. She nodded. "For presenting research the board didn't like." "I'm sorry," he replied. "We don't accept students with active expulsions from other districts." She left before he could say anything else. That night, she sat in her room surrounded by stacks of books, printouts, notes. She tried to study. Tried to keep her mind moving. But her fingers hovered over the keyboard without touching it. For the first time in her life, Amara felt trapped by her own intelligence. What use was all of this mind, this hunger, this relentless curiosity, if the world wasn't going to let her use it? She slammed the laptop shut and pushed everything off the desk. Papers scattered. Books hit the floor. And for one terrifying second, she felt like she could fall apart entirely. But then, almost involuntarily, her eyes landed on the small leather journal Jason had given her. Still sitting on the shelf. Untouched since the night of the storm. She grabbed it. Flipped it open. Use your mind to build your future. And come back to burn the lies down. She read the words again and again until they started to feel like a pulse. A rhythm. A heartbeat. She picked up a pen. And she began to write. First slowly. Just fragments of thoughts. But then faster. Diagrams. Notes. Code structures. Questions. Theories. She poured herself onto those pages like her survival depended on it. And maybe it did. In that moment, she decided, they could bar her from classrooms. They could blacklist her from districts. But they couldn't erase her mind. She would build something they couldn't silence. Something too big to ignore. The next day, she texted Jason, meet me at the library. 4 p.m. Bring snacks. When he arrived, she was already there, laptop open, surrounded by books and printouts. She barely looked up. You're starting something, he said. I'm continuing something, she corrected. But bigger. He set down a bag of chips. So what's the plan? She looked at him, and for the first time in days, her eyes were alive. I'm going to build a system that tells the truth. Not the polished lie they hide behind. Real data. Real consequences. If they're going to shut me out, I'll make sure they can't shut out what I know. Jason raised a brow. And then? And then, she said, we burn the lies down. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. A beam of late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the worn wooden table where they sat. They didn't have a school anymore. But they had a mission. And sometimes, that was more powerful than any classroom could ever be. Amara Johnson didn't sleep much anymore. Not because she couldn't, but because her mind had started operating on a different schedule, like it had detached from ordinary time and was living somewhere between fury and purpose. Every night bled into morning as she sat in the library's back corner with her laptop open, notebooks spread around her like the shattered pieces of something she was rebuilding. She wasn't just writing code now. She was decoding a system. It began with a question that wouldn't let her go: if the algorithm was biased, where did the bias come from? On the surface, the school's AI-based grading system looked clean, efficient, impartial. It processed attendance records, past test scores, homework completion, and classroom engagement, all tied into a slick dashboard that told teachers how likely a student was to succeed. But algorithms weren't magic. They were reflections of the people who built them. Amara dug deeper. She downloaded academic papers on predictive learning models, studied open-source code from similar systems, tracked patents and public datasets used in educational software. The more she learned, the more she saw the cracks. One night, sitting beneath a flickering lamp in the library's tech lab, she ran a simulation using dummy data she'd created. Student profiles with identical academic histories but different names, zip codes, and racial identifiers. The results were chilling. Marcus, age 17, from a low-income zip code, scored a 2.6 predicted GPA. Braden, same scores, same participation, but from a wealthier area. 3.8. The only real difference? The metadata. Where they came from. What they looked like. Who the world thought they were. It wasn't a flaw. It was a pattern. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. The screen glowed in the dim room, casting sharp shadows against her face. She felt like she was looking at something radioactive, something that had been buried beneath years of policy talk and school board meetings. The system was working exactly how it was designed. The next day, she showed Jason the simulation results. He didn't speak at first. Just scrolled through the spreadsheet, the charts, the line-by-line comparisons. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet. "This isn't just bias," he said. "It's profiling." Amara nodded. "They're calling it predictive learning, but really, it's social sorting. It's deciding who's worth investing in before we even walk into the classroom. And no one's talking about it. No one can. It's all locked up in proprietary software and academic doublespeak. But I can break it down. Translate it. Make people see it for what it is." Jason exhaled. This is bigger than Greenridge. She knew that. And it scared her. Because the moment she realized this wasn't just about her, it meant she couldn't walk away anymore. So she built. She used open-source AI platforms and trained her own model, not to predict who would succeed, but to expose how flawed the current systems were. She created a side-by-side interface showing the original grading AI's results next to hers. Then she coded in a visualization tool, bars, graphs, real faces. Something human. Something undeniable. But with every new layer she uncovered, the deeper the rabbit hole got. She traced the codebase of Greenridge's system back to a major education tech company called Axiomed. Their software was used in hundreds of schools across the country. She found documents, public ones, buried in legal filings, that revealed how districts had been sold on the product. Terms like early intervention, efficiency and resource allocation, and objective student evaluation filled the pages. But nowhere, did they explain how race, income, or zip code factored into the outcomes. Because if they had, the whole thing would have fallen apart. Amara printed the documents out and spread them across her bedroom floor. Each page felt like a piece of the monster she was finally beginning to see clearly. This wasn't just a story of one school punishing a girl for being too smart. This was a story of a system that punished every kid like her before they even had a chance. Jason called one night and said, "You're not sleeping again, are you?" "I'm close," she replied. "To what?" "To something real." Still, not everything was progress. Her mom had grown quieter in recent weeks. Not distant, just worn. She worried every time she saw Amara's exhausted face, every time she noticed her skipping meals or writing code until sunrise. One night, she sat down across from her daughter at the kitchen table and said, "You know I believe in you, right?" Amara looked up. "I know. But sometimes believing in you means I'm scared for you." That was the first time Amara let her guard down. She reached across the table and took her mom's hand. "I have to do this." "I know," her mom said softly. "Just promise me you'll survive it." Amara nodded. She would. Somehow. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. She started receiving anonymous messages online. The first few were vague. "You're chasing shadows. You're not helping anyone." Then they got worse. "Careful where you point your spotlight. Some things are better in the dark." She traced the IP addresses. Most were masked. One was pinged back to a corporate location, Axiomed's regional office. Jason begged her to stop. "They're watching you, Amara. You're a kid with a laptop up against a billion-dollar company." "No," she corrected. "I'm a kid with the truth." And then she made the decision that changed everything. She uploaded a demo version of her tool to an anonymous site. Password protected. No name, no signature. Just a link, a note, and a single line of instruction. This is how the system sees your child. Within 24 hours, it had over 3,000 hits. Then 10,000. A small education blog picked it up. Then a parent group in Chicago. And then, someone shared it on a national teachers forum. The storm had started again. But this time, Amara wasn't hiding from it. She was the lightning. The first time Amara saw her name trending, it was surreal. Hashtag the algorithm lies. Hashtag justice for Amara. Hashtag let her speak. It started with a tweet from a teacher in Detroit who had found her anonymous tool through a colleague in California. Just ran my students' data through this, he wrote. Half of them were flagged by our system for low success. Amara's model shows they're outperforming district expectations. How many kids are we failing on purpose? Within hours, journalists began digging. Parent advocacy groups started reposting her demo. Education watchdogs launched threads. The system she had quietly reverse-engineered in her bedroom was now a national conversation. And for a moment, a brief, shining moment, Amara felt hope. Real, stomach-flipping, breath-catching hope. The kind that whispered, "You were never crazy. You were always right." Jason showed up to her house that night with ice cream and a stunned expression. "You just broke the internet," he said, grinning. "You actually did it." She was still sitting in front of her laptop, her legs tucked underneath her like she hadn't moved in hours. "I didn't do it for the internet," she said, though a tiny, stunned smile curled at the corner of her mouth. Her inbox was flooded. Anonymous teachers thanking her. Parents sharing horror stories. Students from across the country saying, "I thought I was the only one." That night, as the house slept and the digital world pulsed with energy, Amara walked outside and looked up at the stars. The sky felt too big to hold everything she was feeling. Fear. Relief. Rage. Wonder. And then came the backlash. It started quietly. A statement from Axiomed: "The claims made by anonymous parties reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of how machine learning functions in academic settings." Then a letter to the schools: "Remain confident in your tools. Do not be swayed by media sensationalism." Then a more aggressive twist. Her mother's phone rang. A man claiming to be from a security agency asked if Amara had recently been in contact with foreign software developers. Another email warned of legal consequences for sharing proprietary software. One morning, Jason opened his email to find an internship opportunity rescinded, no explanation, just a line: "We've decided to move in a different direction." Even Amara's old teachers began speaking out, not in defense, but in coded language on local news interviews. She always had potential, but struggled with authority. Very bright, but emotionally reactive. Her data may be fabricated. We had concerns for years. Amara watched it all unfold like she was floating outside her own body. One second, she was the truth teller. The next, she was being painted as the villain in her own story. The highest climax always invites the sharpest drop. One morning, while scrolling through hundreds of messages, Amara paused at a comment. Maybe she wasn't expelled for being too smart. Maybe she was just dangerous. She stared at the words so long they stopped making sense. Then she shut her laptop and didn't open it for 3 days. Jason came over twice. Left food on the porch. Sent her memes. Waited. On the 3rd day, she answered the door. Her hair was uncombed, her hoodie wrinkled. "I don't know if I can carry this," she whispered. He didn't say anything at first. Just walked in and sat beside her on the couch. "You're not carrying it alone. I feel like they're erasing me again. First they silenced me in school. Now they're trying to bury me under their version of the truth." Jason reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. It was filled with letters, actual letters. Printed emails. Messages. A thick stack. He laid them out on the table. "Read them." She opened one. "I'm a mom in Philadelphia. My son was flagged as unmotivated by your district's software. I always knew something wasn't right. Thank you." Another. "Your courage gave my students a voice. I used your tool in class today. My kids cried when they saw what the system had assumed about them. They finally saw it wasn't their fault." Another. "You made me feel less alone." Amara pressed a hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook, not with fear this time, but release. All this time, she thought she was just coding. Just proving a point. But she had touched something raw, something real. They weren't fighting her. They were fighting what she represented. And she wasn't alone anymore. The next day, she opened her laptop again. This time, she didn't hide behind anonymity. She wrote a blog post, long, direct, emotional. She didn't name names, but she told the story, of how she was expelled, how the system lied, how she built something out of anger and hope and desperation. How she wanted the world to see the children it was labeling as failures before they even had a chance. She ended it with one line. "You tried to bury me. But I was a seed." Within 12 hours, it had over 2 million views. And then, something she never expected happened. A lawyer from a civil rights education group reached out. Then a professor from NYU. Then a tech nonprofit with funding and legal resources offered to help her scale the tool, legally. People weren't just watching. They were showing up. Still, Amara knew the fight wasn't over. For every teacher that thanked her, there was a superintendent dismissing her. For every student who found hope in her tool, there was a parent accusing her of stirring racial division. And even as doors began to open, she knew others would try to close them behind her. But something had shifted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't knocking on the gates of power, begging to be let in. She was building her own house. Brick by brick. Line of code by line of code. The world had finally looked back. Now, it had to decide what it would do with the truth. And Amara? She was just getting started. It was strange how quickly things changed when people started listening. A week after her blog post went viral, Amara found herself sitting in a conference room 3 floors above the New York Public Library. The walls were glass, the table was marble, and the people around her were all adults, lawyers, professors, tech advocates, waiting for her to speak like she was the expert in the room. She was 17. "I just want to make sure no other kid feels what I felt," she said. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were curled into fists beneath the table. No kid should be measured by a system that was never made for them. The woman across from her, a civil rights attorney named Nadira Cole, gave a slow, approving nod. "Then we build something that isn't just reactive. We build a structure. Something that lasts." Jason, sitting quietly beside Amara, scribbled in his notebook. Amara glanced at him, grateful beyond words. He didn't talk much in these meetings, but he showed up, every single time. Sometimes that mattered more than anything. Nadira leaned forward. "Amara, your prototype opened the door. But what comes next needs to be strategic. You can't go to war with every district and every company. We have to play the long game." Amara already knew that. She had burned fast and bright. But now she had to become something else, focused, organized, impossible to silence, not because she was loud, but because she was right and undeniable. They launched the initiative a month later, Project Equify. The goal was simple. Create a transparent, open-source AI that evaluated students without bias, one that anyone, anywhere, could audit. They'd start in 5 pilot schools. Train teachers. Work with community leaders. And most importantly, build a platform that translated the data into human stories. No more faceless graphs. Real students. Real lives. The media attention was a blessing and a burden. Reporters wanted interviews. Influencers reached out to collaborate. Education boards tried to co-opt the language without acknowledging the problem. "You're a symbol now," Nadira told her one day as they reviewed the early grant proposals. "But don't let them turn you into a mascot. Stay sharp. Stay specific." Amara tried. But fame, especially sudden, viral fame, was like drinking from a fire hose. Her inbox overflowed. A podcast wanted her to speak on youth leadership. A senator requested a closed-door meeting. A tech conference offered her a keynote slot. But for every spotlight, there was shadow. Late-night emails from corporate accounts she didn't recognize. Harassment on forums she never signed up for. A rumor circulating that she had faked the original data. And underneath it all, the subtle pressure to soften her message. "You're so articulate," one panel host told her after a live Q&A, "Have you thought about being more inspirational? Less confrontational?" Amara smiled tightly and said nothing. Because she'd learned something else too. They're comfortable with your voice, as long as it doesn't shake their foundation. So she kept shaking. Back home, her world was changing in quieter ways. Her mom had taken time off work to support her, and for the first time in years, they cooked dinner together regularly. Sometimes her mother just watched her across the table, proud, worried, in awe. "I knew you'd do something big," she said one night. "I just didn't think it would happen before your 18th birthday." Amara laughed. "Me either." Jason was still her constant. They had become more than friends in ways neither of them spoke about directly, but that showed up in the details, the way he noticed when she was too tired to speak and brought her tea anyway, the way she always saved a seat for him at every meeting, no matter who else was in the room. They didn't need labels. They just showed up. Still, the weight of it all pressed harder as the weeks went on. For every system they improved, there were 10 more like it. Hidden. Protected. Sanitized behind corporate contracts. One night, Amara sat in her room, staring at a spreadsheet of feedback from one of the pilot schools. Some teachers were enthusiastic. Others, not so much. "It's a nice idea, but it doesn't fit into our curriculum planning. The interface is too emotional, we don't need to hear from students, just see their scores. We've been doing it this way for years. Why change now?" That last one made her close her laptop and push it away. The long game wasn't just long, it was exhausting. It wasn't about one fight. It was about hundreds. Each conversation, each meeting, each data set she had to untangle and humanize and defend. That night, she sat in silence until dawn, wondering if she was still the right person for this fight, or if the fight was too big for anyone. But then, just as the sun crept over the edge of the sky, her phone buzzed. A message from a student in one of the test schools. "I used your program to show my mom what the system said about me." She cried. She said she always knew I was more than what they told her. "Thank you." Amara stared at the screen, eyes stinging. One student. One family. One truth that had finally been heard. It reminded her why she started. Not for awards. Not for headlines. But for that kid. The one who'd been written off before anyone even tried to understand them. The long game wasn't glamorous. But it was necessary. She got up. Made coffee. Pulled out her notebook. And started planning the next school. The next district. The next conversation. Because sometimes, changing the world wasn't about the big moments. It was about showing up again and again, especially when it was hard. Especially when no one else would. The first time Amara walked into a legislative building, she expected something dramatic, cold stairs, grand halls echoing with history, maybe even a metal detector that buzzed in protest at the revolution she carried inside her backpack. But what she got instead was a stale bagel, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and a 5-minute delay while an assistant scrambled to remember her name. Amira, right? From that education thing? She gave a polite smile. Amara. I'm here to speak with Representative Caldwell. The assistant barely glanced up. He's in session. You'll get 5 minutes, maybe. Welcome to politics. The meeting didn't go badly. It just didn't go anywhere. Caldwell, an older white man with an expensive tie and a practiced half-smile, listened to her presentation about biased grading algorithms like it was a TED Talk he hadn't signed up for. Well, Miss Johnson, he said as he clicked his pen and leaned back, this is certainly passionate. But if we start questioning every tool our schools use, where does it end? We need structure, not chaos. Amara leaned forward. What you have now isn't structure. It's discrimination disguised as data. Caldwell chuckled. You've got a future in advocacy, no doubt. But in the real world, people like systems. They make things run. Jason was waiting for her outside. One look at her face and he didn't ask how it went. He patted my head with his words, she said as they walked to the subway. Then sent me back to the kids' table. Jason looked over. Welcome to the deep end. The fight had moved out of the schools and into the suits. After Project Equify gained traction, more eyes turned toward the systems that made billions selling education tech to public districts. What had started with one platform had become an industry-wide reckoning. But reckoning doesn't sit well with power. Lobbyists from major education tech firms started showing up to the same meetings. They wore $1,000 watches and practiced empathy with surgical precision. They didn't attack Amara directly. They didn't have to. They talked in circles. Pushed reports with cherry-picked data. Commissioned think tanks with official-sounding names that published papers titled things like, The Myth of Algorithmic Bias in Modern Classrooms. They sponsored conferences. Bought headlines. Whispered in the ears of people with votes and budgets. And every time Amara walked into a room to present her findings, she felt their presence like a cold wind. They didn't need to destroy her. They just needed to drown her out. One afternoon, Nadira called with news. A bill just passed in committee that reinforces data-driven learning systems across the state. What kind of systems? Amara asked. Closed ones. Proprietary ones. And guess which company gets the contract? Amara didn't need to guess. It was Axiomed, the very firm whose algorithms she had exposed months earlier. They're rewriting the rules while we're still trying to prove they're broken, Jason muttered when she told him. Amara sat at her desk in silence. Her laptop was open, a blank document blinking back at her. She was supposed to be preparing for a presentation at a district in Atlanta. Instead, all she could think about was the tidal wave coming for her work. I don't know if we can beat this, she admitted. Jason looked up from his phone. That's not what you said 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I didn't know how deep this goes. Jason was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, he asked, Are you tired or scared? She met his eyes. Both. That night, Amara didn't sleep. She opened every legal document she could find tied to the new bill. She poured through the language, terms like efficacy assurance, data compliance integrity, adaptive predictive modeling. All meaningless jargon. But buried near the bottom was a clause that froze her blood: districts adopting third-party AI systems will be prohibited from implementing non-licensed, external analytical models. In other words, her work would be banned. She wasn't just fighting for change now. She was fighting for the right to fight at all. The next morning, she sent an email to her team. Subject: Emergency call, tonight 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Body: This is no longer about transparency. They're trying to outlaw what we're building. We need a strategy. We need visibility. If they want the spotlight, let's give them one. That night, she went live. No filters. No prep. Just Amara in her bedroom, face lit only by the blue light of her laptop screen. She told the story, again. But this time, she didn't stop at the personal. She named names. Quoted the bill. Explained what it meant in plain English. They're not fixing the system. They're doubling down on it. They're using power to protect profit. And they're using language to confuse you. Hundreds watched live. Then thousands. By morning, the video had over 500,000 views. A new hashtag trended, #LetUsCode. Teachers made TikToks showing how Project Equify exposed flaws in their grading systems. Parents flooded school board meetings demanding transparency. A group of student activists in Texas created a toolkit based on her model. Amara had reignited the flame. But victory didn't come with fireworks. It came with exhaustion. With late nights, shaky hands, tearful calls with Nadira. With sleepless hours wondering if she had already gone too far. Or not far enough. And yet, every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the halls of Greenridge. The way her name was scrubbed from the walls. The way she was made to feel like a glitch in the system when all along, the system was the glitch. So she kept showing up. She called legislators. Testified at hearings. Spoke at youth conferences. Met with engineers to fortify the platform. And through it all, Jason was there, quietly steady, carrying half the weight without ever needing credit. On a cold Thursday in March, Amara stood in front of a room of 30 adults, educators, lawyers, school board members, and made a statement she would never forget. If your system only works when no one questions it, it's not education. It's obedience. Silence. Then applause. The kind that comes not from excitement, but from recognition. They weren't clapping because it was pretty. They were clapping because it was true. The enemies wore suits now. But so did the allies. And Amara had learned something else. You don't need to burn the system down. You just need to build something better beside it, so undeniable that the world has no choice but to follow. Amara stared at her phone, the screen glowing in the dim light of her apartment as the message sank deep into her chest, "We need to talk." The sender's name was one she hadn't seen or thought about in over a decade, Marcus Reynolds. Her breath caught, and the flood of memories crashed over her all at once, the ghosts of her past stirring in the corners of her mind. Marcus had been the one person she thought she could trust, the closest friend she had back in Greenridge High, before everything fell apart. Before she was expelled. Before she became the girl labeled too smart and too difficult. Her fingers trembled as she typed a cautious reply, "When? Where?" The answer came almost instantly, the cafe on 42nd Street. Noon. That cafe, the one tucked between a rundown laundromat and an old barber shop, was the place where they had once dreamed aloud, shared their hopes, and planned a future that seemed just out of reach. 10 years ago, that place had felt like a refuge. Now, it was a doorway back into a chapter she wasn't sure she wanted to revisit. When she pushed open the cafe door, the warm scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the quiet murmur of conversation. Marcus was already there, sitting in their old corner booth, a cup of black coffee steaming gently in front of him. His face was more lined now, the youthful innocence replaced by the weight of years lived hard and lessons learned. His eyes, though, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at her with fierce loyalty, still held a softness. A regret that mirrored her own. "Amara," he said as she slid into the seat opposite him. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, saying nothing as 1,000 questions buzzed silently between them. Marcus reached out, brushing a stray curl from his forehead as if trying to bridge the distance time had created. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. I'm sorry it took me this long." She folded her hands in her lap, the years of anger and hurt making her chest tight. "Why now?" she finally asked, eyes locked on his. "Why after all this time?" Marcus swallowed hard. Because I've been watching you. Following your work with Project Equify. The fight you're leading against those biased systems, it's incredible. You're making a real difference. He paused, searching her face. And I realized. I never told you how sorry I was. How much I regret staying silent when they expelled you. I should have stood up for you. I should have told them that you were the smartest person in that school, that you deserved to be there as much as anyone else. Amara's throat tightened. She had carried that silence like a wound, bleeding quietly for years. The feeling of abandonment was something she thought she had learned to live with, but hearing it spoken aloud peeled back the scabs of old pain. You weren't the only one who stayed quiet, she said softly. Everyone did. And I thought, maybe it was my fault. That maybe I had pushed too hard or been too much for them. But you were my friend. And you never said a word. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. I was scared. I was afraid of losing everything I'd worked for, my spot on the team, my scholarship, my chance at college. But none of that mattered compared to losing you. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. I want to make it right. For the first time in years, Amara felt something shift inside her. The anger began to melt away, replaced by a cautious hope. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about reclaiming the power it once held over her. They spent the afternoon talking, the hours slipping away like the pages of a book finally being rewritten. They revisited old memories, late-night study sessions, whispered plans about changing the world, the laughter that had once filled empty classrooms. But beneath the nostalgia was a shared understanding that the past could no longer define them. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow through the cafe windows, Marcus leaned forward. I want to help you fight this, he said. Not just because I owe you, but because I believe in what you're doing. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Amara looked at him, the weight of her journey reflected in his steady gaze. The fight against corrupt systems and biased algorithms was far bigger than she had imagined, and it was about to get even harder. But maybe, just maybe, having someone who truly understood where she came from could make the difference. She realized that the battles she had fought were never just about technology or education policy. They were about reclaiming dignity, about standing up for every quiet voice silenced by fear and indifference. They were about breaking the cycle of isolation she had lived through as a teenager. As they stepped out of the cafe and into the cool evening air, Amara felt the city pulse around her, alive and full of possibility. The past was still there, with all its shadows, but it no longer controlled her steps. With Marcus by her side, a piece of her broken history was becoming a bridge to a stronger future. Walking together down the bustling street, she finally spoke. Thank you for coming back. For not giving up on me. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that carried both apology and promise. Never again. You're too important to me, and to this fight, to ever be left behind. Amara took a deep breath and let the warmth of the moment settle in. The war ahead would be long and fierce. There would be more setbacks and betrayals, more nights spent wrestling with doubt and fear. But she was ready. Not because the path was easy, but because she had found a reason to keep walking it. This was no longer just her fight alone. It was theirs. And with every step forward, the shadows from the past grew smaller, until one day, they would disappear entirely. The days following her reunion with Marcus felt like a fragile truce between Amara and the past she'd long tried to escape. But peace was never meant to last. The moment she stepped back into the public eye, the walls she had fought to tear down began to close in around her again. The very system she was challenging started pushing back with a force she hadn't anticipated. Her inbox filled rapidly, not just with supportive messages, but with threats, warnings, and veiled ultimatums. Anonymous accounts on social media spun stories twisting her words, trying to paint her as a troublemaker, a disruptor who wanted to dismantle order itself. The same voices that once whispered doubts in the halls of Greenridge High were now amplified into a chorus of opposition. One afternoon, as Amara sat in her modest office reviewing data from her latest algorithm audit, her phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed an unknown number. She hesitated, but answered. The voice on the other end was cold, clipped. "Stop this, Amara. You're crossing a line." Then the line went dead. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization that her fight had become much bigger, and more dangerous, than she ever imagined. This was no longer just about fairness in education or technology. It was about power, control, and those who refused to be challenged. Amara called Marcus immediately. "We need to talk. This isn't just about policy anymore. Someone wants to intimidate me." His voice was steady but concerned. "You're not alone in this. Let's meet." That evening, they gathered with a small circle of trusted allies, activists, programmers, and former students who had faced similar battles. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Each person had their own story of being silenced, dismissed, or threatened for speaking out. Together, they formed a fragile coalition, united by a shared purpose but wary of the forces arrayed against them. "We're up against more than just a biased system," Amara said, her voice firm. "We're facing a network that profits from keeping things the way they are. Our challenge isn't just technical, it's political. And that means we have to be smarter, faster, and stronger." Marcus leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We need to expose them. Find the people behind these attacks and make their tactics public. Transparency is our weapon." The plan was risky. To dig into confidential data, to whistleblow on powerful figures who wielded influence behind the scenes, meant opening themselves up to retaliation. But Amara knew it was necessary. Silence had only ever protected the guilty. Over the next weeks, the team worked tirelessly, often late into the night. Lines of code and emails blurred into a constant stream of data and strategy sessions. Every discovery brought new obstacles, a firewall here, a smear campaign there, but also new victories. They uncovered evidence of algorithmic bias deliberately embedded in the testing and admissions software used in schools across the country. Evidence that those who controlled the system were manipulating outcomes to favor certain demographics while shutting out others. When Amara presented these findings at a small press conference, the reaction was immediate and fierce. Traditional media outlets questioned her motives. The Education Board issued statements defending their systems. Social media exploded with heated debates and attacks against her character. The storm was growing. But amidst the chaos, a wave of support began to rise. Students and teachers from across the country reached out, sharing stories of their own struggles with unfair systems. Parents expressed gratitude for bringing these issues to light. Slowly, the conversation was shifting. Still, the threats did not stop. One morning, Amara arrived at her apartment to find her door forced open, papers scattered, her laptop missing. The message was clear: back off, or pay the price. Fear crept in, but so did resolve. She wasn't the scared girl from Greenridge anymore. She was a leader. And leaders don't run, they fight. With Marcus and her team by her side, Amara doubled down on her efforts, pushing for legislative hearings, working with sympathetic lawmakers, and rallying public opinion. Every day was a battle, a careful dance of progress and setbacks, hope and frustration. Through it all, Amara's personal life strained under the pressure. Friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the danger she attracted. Family worried for her safety, pleading for her to reconsider. Yet, in the quiet moments, Marcus remained her anchor, a reminder of why she started this journey and what was truly at stake. One late night, as they pored over the latest data leaks, Marcus looked up, exhaustion lining his face. "You're doing more than anyone could have dreamed, Amara. But remember, even the strongest warriors need rest. Don't lose yourself in the fight." She smiled tiredly. "I won't. Not when so many are counting on us." The rising conflict was no longer just a story of one girl expelled for being too smart. It was a movement. A challenge to a broken system. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The storm was just beginning, and Amara was ready to face it head-on. The city skyline stretched out before Amara like a glowing promise, shimmering with the colors of twilight. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she was fighting alone, battling anonymous threats, shadowy powers bent on silencing her voice. Now, she stood at the threshold of something new, something bigger than she had ever dared imagine. The invitation from the Silicon Valley Research Institute sat heavy in her mind, a chance to be part of the team tasked with redesigning the very educational AI systems that had once been used to shut her out. She remembered the day she received the message. It was terse but unmistakably clear: "We want you on board. Your expertise is invaluable." For a moment, she hesitated. Could she trust them? The same institutions she had challenged, the same powers that had tried to bury her, were now reaching out. Was this a genuine offer or a strategic move to co-opt her efforts and silence her through inclusion? The dilemma consumed her. She wrestled with every angle, every potential consequence. Taking the job could mean abandoning the grassroots movement she had fought so hard to build, but it also promised access to resources and influence far beyond anything she could muster on her own. One evening, Marcus found her sitting alone on her balcony, the city lights twinkling below like stars scattered across the earth. He sat beside her quietly before breaking the silence. "Amara, this is the chance you've worked for, not just to expose the problems, but to fix them from the inside. It's risky, but it's the kind of risk that changes the game." She nodded slowly, her mind racing with the possibilities and dangers. "I'm scared, Marcus. If I step inside that world, I could lose myself, or worse, be used." Marcus reached out, his hand firm on hers. "You're stronger than they think. And you're not going in alone." The next morning, Amara booked her flight to California, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was stepping into a new arena, a world of sleek offices, cutting-edge technology, and powerful stakeholders who shaped the future of education. It was an entirely different battlefield, one where the rules were unspoken and the enemies well-dressed. Upon arrival, the Research Institute overwhelmed her senses. Its modern glass towers reflected the brilliant sun, a symbol of innovation and ambition. Inside, the hum of computers, whispered conversations, and clicking keyboards formed the soundtrack of progress. She was introduced to her new team, a blend of seasoned engineers, data scientists, psychologists, and policy experts, all driven by the goal of creating an AI system that could deliver truly equitable education. At first, the work excited her. Diving into complex datasets, refining algorithms, and collaborating with bright minds was invigorating. She felt like a soldier armed with knowledge, ready to dismantle the biases woven deep into the digital fabric of the system. But soon, cracks began to show. During a team meeting, she presented her findings on how subtle racial and socioeconomic biases persisted in the current AI models. Her words, meant to ignite change, instead sparked defensiveness. One senior engineer leaned back, arms crossed. "Bias in data is inevitable. We can't expect perfection." Amara's voice sharpened. "Perfection isn't the goal, justice is. These algorithms determine who gets opportunities and who doesn't. They shape futures. We owe it to those kids to do better." The room grew tense. Some nodded quietly in agreement, but others exchanged wary glances. She realized then that the biggest obstacle wasn't technology, it was the entrenched culture resistant to change. Despite the resistance, Amara found unexpected allies. Young researchers eager to challenge the status quo, veterans quietly disillusioned with the system. Together, they formed a coalition within the institute, pushing for transparency and accountability. Meanwhile, pressure from outside mounted. Powerful lobbying groups, threatened by the potential upheaval, began applying influence. Meetings grew more guarded, conversations more coded. Amara sensed she was under watch. One evening, as she left the building, a stranger approached her. "Be careful what battles you choose," the man said, voice low but carrying unmistakable warning. "Some fights cost more than you think." Instead of fear, Amara felt a fierce determination. This was no longer just a job. It was a mission. And if she faltered, the consequences would ripple far beyond herself. Amara worked tirelessly, sometimes sleeping only a few hours a night. She led the team through grueling rounds of testing, tweaking the algorithm, demanding it be more than a technical marvel, it had to be a tool for real change. Weeks turned to months. Slowly, the prototype began to take shape, a system that adapted dynamically to students' needs, removing unfair barriers and highlighting potential regardless of background. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A trial run in several districts showed a dramatic drop in bias, opening doors for students historically overlooked. It was a victory that felt like a first breath of fresh air in a stale room. But victory carried a price. After a presentation to stakeholders, Amara's phone buzzed with a threatening message: "Back off now, or face the consequences." The warning reminded her of the risks she took every day. The same powers who once tried to silence her in high school were now trying to intimidate her on a much larger scale. Yet, standing at the crossroads of this battle, Amara felt no hesitation. She thought of the young students depending on her, the voices crying out for fairness in a broken system. She thought of Marcus, her allies, and the countless stories of struggle and resilience that had brought her here. Her resolve hardened. She was no longer the expelled girl running from her past. She was a force demanding a new future. At a late-night strategy meeting with her coalition, she laid out the next step: publicly releasing the data exposing bias, no matter the fallout. "Transparency is the only way to break the cycle," she told the group. "We have to shine a light, even if the shadows fight back." The room was quiet, the weight of the decision settling over them. But beneath the tension was a shared understanding, a commitment to courage, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, Amara's fight took on new dimensions. Media outlets covered the story, public debates flared. Some praised her as a visionary, others vilified her as a troublemaker disrupting the status quo. Through it all, Amara held steady, her journey weaving from the streets of her hometown to the highest levels of technological innovation. The road was rough, fraught with danger and sacrifice, but every step carried her closer to the dream she had held since childhood, an education system that truly belonged to all. As she looked out her apartment window one evening, the city lights flickering like stars, Amara allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The path was far from over, but she was no longer walking it alone. The unexpected path she had taken was shaping a future where intelligence, courage, and heart could finally break down the walls built by fear and prejudice. This was more than a career. It was a revolution. And she was ready to lead it. The buzz in the conference room was electric, a mixture of excitement and tension hanging thick in the air. Amara stood before a crowd of educators, policymakers, and tech innovators. People who had the power to reshape education but also the inclination to resist change. Today wasn't just another presentation, it was a pivotal moment in her journey, the opportunity to show that her work wasn't just theory or data points, but a movement capable of transforming lives. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "We've spent years developing an AI system that adapts to each student's unique needs, regardless of race, income, or zip code," she began, scanning the room, catching skeptical glances and hopeful eyes alike. "For too long, education has been a gatekeeper, reinforcing inequalities rather than breaking them down. Our technology can change that." Questions came fast. Some were pointed and critical. How do you ensure the AI doesn't inherit biases from the data it's trained on? What about privacy concerns? How do you address the lack of access to technology in underserved communities? Amara answered each with the clarity and passion that had become her trademark. She explained the rigorous testing, the ethical frameworks guiding their design, and the partnerships formed with schools in diverse districts to ensure accessibility. After hours of discussion, a wave of cautious optimism rippled through the room. Several influential voices offered support, promising pilot programs and funding. It was the breakthrough she had worked so tirelessly for. But outside the glowing spotlight of that conference room, the challenges deepened. One evening, as Amara walked back to her apartment, she noticed a figure following her from a distance. Her pulse quickened, the familiar anxiety gnawing at her nerves. She quickened her pace, heart racing, until she reached the safety of her door and locked it behind her. The incident was a stark reminder: change didn't come easy, especially when it threatened entrenched interests. In the weeks that followed, Amara doubled down on her efforts. She worked closely with school administrators and teachers, understanding firsthand the daily realities they faced. Many were wary of technology, fearing it would replace their roles or impose rigid standards that ignored individual students' humanity. During a visit to a public school in Oakland, Amara met Ms. Hernandez, a veteran teacher whose skepticism was palpable. "I've seen programs come and go," she said bluntly. "Promises made by tech companies don't always translate to classrooms." Amara listened carefully and then shared the story of her own struggles, being expelled for her intelligence, the battles she fought to be heard, and the vision driving her work. She invited Ms. Hernandez to be part of the pilot program, assuring her that teachers' input was central, not sidelined. Slowly, trust began to build. Ms. Hernandez became one of the project's strongest advocates, helping tailor the AI to support teachers rather than replace them. Their collaboration symbolized the bridge between innovation and tradition, a crucial step in breaking barriers. Meanwhile, tensions at the institute simmered beneath the surface. Some colleagues, threatened by Amara's rising influence, sought to undermine her efforts. Data was leaked selectively to the press, painting her work as reckless experimentation. Board meetings became battlegrounds, with debates growing more personal and vitriolic. Amara refused to be deterred. She found strength in Marcus and her close-knit coalition, drawing on their encouragement to stay focused. One late night, Marcus reminded her, "Every revolution faces resistance. The important thing is to keep moving forward." And move forward she did. Public interest swelled as media outlets picked up the story of a young woman challenging systemic bias with science and heart. Students whose lives had been transformed began sharing their experiences, giving the movement a human face. Amara's journey was no longer solitary, it had become a collective cry for justice. Yet, amid the growing momentum, a new challenge emerged: bureaucracy. As the pilot programs expanded, navigating the complex web of regulations, funding, and politics slowed progress. District officials questioned the cost-effectiveness, legal experts debated liability issues, and some conservative groups launched campaigns against the technology, labeling it as intrusive or unfair. Faced with this multifaceted opposition, Amara realized that technical innovation alone was insufficient. To break the barriers fully, she needed allies beyond the tech world: community leaders, parents, students, and politicians who could champion the cause. She embarked on a tireless campaign of outreach, attending town halls, speaking at community centers, and engaging with grassroots organizations. Her message was clear: this was about equity, about giving every child the chance she never had. In a crowded community meeting, a mother shared her story of watching her son struggle in a system that seemed designed to overlook him. "If this AI can help him, it's worth every effort," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Moments like that reaffirmed Amara's purpose. One afternoon, during a pivotal hearing before the State Education Board, Amara presented the results of the pilot programs. Charts showed improvements in student engagement, test scores, and teacher satisfaction. But more compelling were the testimonials from students themselves, voices filled with hope and pride. As she spoke, the room grew quiet, then nods of approval began to ripple through the audience. It was a hard-fought victory, but a victory nonetheless. That night, as Amara sat alone in her apartment, exhaustion washing over her, she reflected on the long road traveled, from the girl expelled for being too smart, to the woman standing at the forefront of an educational revolution. She knew the journey was far from over. The systems she sought to change were vast and deeply rooted. But she also knew that every barrier broken, every mind opened, was a step toward a future where intelligence and passion were celebrated, not punished. Her story was proof that even the harshest setbacks could lead to the greatest triumphs. And in that truth, Amara found strength to keep pushing forward, breaking barriers one by one. Amara had thought that stepping into the spotlight would mean leaving her past behind. After all, 10 years had passed since she was expelled. 10 years of struggle, growth, and reinvention. Yet, no matter how far she ran or how high she climbed, the shadows of that chapter still clung to her, sometimes quietly, sometimes like a storm crashing without warning. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the past collided with her present. The phone call came unexpectedly, breaking her focus while she was preparing a presentation for the upcoming National Education Summit. The voice on the other end was hesitant, familiar yet strained. "Amara? It's Principal Davis. I hope I'm not interrupting." Her heart skipped. Principal Davis, the same man who had overseen her expulsion years ago. The man whose decisions had altered the course of her life. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously, the memories flooding back. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I wanted to talk about what happened back then. I've been thinking a lot. Maybe it's time to clear the air." Amara stared out the window, the golden leaves swirling in the breeze. This was the conversation she'd avoided for a decade, the confrontation she wasn't sure she was ready for. She agreed to meet him the following day at a quiet cafe near the school, an ironic choice, given the storm that had brewed within those walls years ago. When she arrived, Principal Davis was already there, his posture stiff, eyes searching. The years had softened his features, but the weight of regret was unmistakable. "I owe you an apology, Amara," he began, voice low. "Back then, I was under immense pressure, from the board, the parents, even some teachers. Your brilliance was seen as a threat, something to be controlled. I was part of that system, and I'm sorry for the pain it caused you." Amara listened, the bitterness and hurt rising alongside a surprising undercurrent of relief. For years, she'd blamed him entirely, but now she saw a man trapped in his own conflicts, struggling against forces much larger than himself. "I appreciate your honesty," she replied. "But it's hard to forget how alone I felt. Being expelled wasn't just about losing a school, it was like losing a part of myself." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And I want to help make it right, if I can." Their conversation stretched on, shifting from past mistakes to present hopes. Davis expressed interest in collaborating with her on reform efforts, offering access to the school's resources and community. Walking away from the cafe, Amara felt a mixture of emotions: pain, forgiveness, cautious hope. The past wasn't erased, but perhaps it could be transformed. In the days that followed, this tentative reconciliation began to ripple outward. Word spread through the education community about the unusual alliance between Amara and her former adversary. Some greeted it with skepticism, others with curiosity. For Amara, it was another step in her journey, not just as a reformer but as a person learning to reconcile her history with her future. Meanwhile, the National Education Summit loomed. It was a stage larger than any she had stood on before, filled with luminaries, policymakers, and media. The pressure was immense, but so was the opportunity. As Amara prepared her keynote speech, she revisited her story, the highs and lows, the battles fought in classrooms and boardrooms, the faces of students who had inspired her. She knew this was her chance to share not just data or technology, but the human heartbeat behind the movement. On the day of the summit, the auditorium was packed. Cameras flashed, microphones awaited, and the air thrummed with anticipation. Amara stepped onto the stage, her gaze sweeping the audience. For a moment, she saw beyond the seats to the countless children whose futures hinged on the decisions made in this room. She began with a question: What if the very system designed to nurture talent was the one holding it back? What if every child had the chance not just to learn, but to thrive? Her words echoed, weaving a narrative of struggle and triumph, of a girl expelled for being too smart, who refused to be silenced. She spoke of technology as a tool, not a replacement, but a bridge connecting opportunity to potential. The audience was rapt, some nodding in agreement, others wiping away tears. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. But amid the praise, Amara spotted a figure in the back, a shadow from her past. The school board member who had pushed hardest for her expulsion was watching intently, a cold, unreadable expression. Later, in a private corridor, the board member confronted her. "You think technology will fix what's broken? Education isn't a machine to be programmed, Amara. It's messy, human, complicated." Amara met his gaze evenly. "That's exactly why it needs change. Because messy can't be an excuse for leaving children behind." Their conversation was sharp but civil, a microcosm of the larger battle ahead. Despite the opposition, the summit marked a turning point. Amara's vision gained national attention, sparking conversations across classrooms, policy offices, and living rooms. Yet, the personal challenges persisted. Old wounds reopened as she navigated renewed scrutiny, media speculation, and the relentless pace of activism. One evening, overwhelmed by the weight of expectations, Amara confided in Marcus. "Sometimes I wonder if the price is too high. If the past will always haunt me, no matter how far I go." Marcus took her hand gently. "Your past is part of your power, not your prison. Every scar, every setback, they've shaped the woman leading this change." His words rekindled her spirit. With renewed determination, Amara expanded her efforts, focusing on mentorship programs for students facing similar struggles. She became a beacon for young minds who, like her, refused to be defined by obstacles. Her journey was no longer just about correcting systems, it was about healing wounds, building bridges, and inspiring others to rise. As the chapter of shadows slowly gave way to light, Amara understood that breaking barriers wasn't just about technology or policy. It was about humanity, courage, and the unyielding belief that everyone deserved a chance to shine. The days following the national summit were a whirlwind. Amara found herself thrust into a world she'd long admired from the sidelines, a world where her ideas sparked debates, where every word she spoke was dissected and amplified. Headlines called her a visionary, a disruptor, even a threat to the status quo. But beneath the accolades lay a growing weight, a burden she hadn't anticipated. Each morning, she awoke to an inbox flooded with emails, from supporters, critics, journalists, and students. Some messages lifted her spirits, others cut deep, filled with doubt and cynicism. The line between her public persona and private self blurred. In the midst of this chaos, Marcus remained her anchor. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he sat beside her in the quiet of her apartment. "You're carrying the world on your shoulders," he said gently. Amara sighed, rubbing her temples. "It feels like it. Everyone expects me to have all the answers, to move faster, do more. But sometimes, I'm just tired." Marcus nodded knowingly. "You're human, Amara. It's okay to be tired." The truth was, she feared that showing any vulnerability might be seen as weakness. Growing up, she had learned to hide her struggles behind a mask of confidence. Now, as a leader, the stakes felt even higher. Her nights were restless, filled with visions of classrooms where children sat silent and unseen. The faces of those she'd met during the pilot programs haunted her, their hopes intertwined with her mission. She couldn't let them down. Pressure mounted from all sides. The institute where she worked pushed for rapid results, demanding progress reports and pilot expansions. The media sought sensational headlines, eager for the next controversy or breakthrough. And within her own circle, old wounds sometimes reopened as past rivals resurfaced, questioning her methods and motives. One morning, a blistering editorial accused her of playing politics with children's futures, stirring a storm of backlash. The words stung, but they also fueled a fire within her. She knew that every step forward would be met with resistance. Determined to reclaim her narrative, Amara agreed to an exclusive interview with a respected journalist known for thoughtful, in-depth stories. The conversation was raw and honest. She spoke about her childhood, her expulsion, the challenges of leadership, and the vision driving her work. "It's not about being perfect," she told the reporter. "It's about being persistent, about believing that change is possible even when the odds are stacked against you." The piece was published to wide acclaim, humanizing her in ways that statistics and speeches could not. Messages of support poured in from students, parents, and educators across the country. Yet, amidst the external battles, a more personal challenge surfaced. The relationship with her family, once a source of strength, became strained. Her mother, proud but worried, struggled to understand the sacrifices Amara was making. Late-night phone calls turned tense as worries about burnout and isolation crept in. "You've always been our bright star," her mother said during one call, voice trembling. "But don't lose yourself in the fight. We need you too." Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to reassure her mother, to promise that she could do it all. But the truth was, the weight of expectations sometimes felt unbearable. Seeking solace, Amara returned to a familiar place, her childhood neighborhood park. Under the canopy of ancient oaks, memories flooded back, afternoons spent dreaming beneath those trees, a young girl with big ideas and even bigger dreams. Sitting on a weathered bench, she pulled out a worn notebook, her first journal, filled with scribbles and sketches from years ago. Reading through the pages, she found traces of the girl she once was, curious, fearless, and hopeful. In that moment, Amara realized something vital. The burden she carried was not hers alone. It was shared by every young mind waiting for a chance, every family hoping for a better future, every teacher fighting against impossible odds. Her mission was bigger than any one person. Reinvigorated, she crafted a new strategy. Instead of trying to do everything herself, she would build a coalition, a network of advocates, mentors, and leaders united by a common purpose. She reached out to educators like Ms. Hernandez, community organizers, student leaders, and even former skeptics willing to join the cause. Together, they formed a grassroots movement dedicated to transforming education from the ground up. Workshops were held in community centers, mentorship programs launched in underfunded schools, and technology adapted to local needs. The movement grew organically, fueled by shared passion and purpose. Through it all, Amara learned to share her own vulnerabilities, to ask for help when needed, and to celebrate small victories amid ongoing struggles. The weight of expectations remained, but it was no longer crushing. It was a mantle she wore with humility and resolve. One evening, as she prepared for a community event, Marcus handed her a simple gift. A framed photo of the park bench where she had found clarity. "Remember where you started," he said softly. "And remember why you keep going." Amara smiled, feeling the strength of her journey etched into every line of that photo, the story of a girl who refused to be silenced, who turned obstacles into opportunities, and who carried the hopes of many on her shoulders. The path ahead was still uncertain, the challenges immense. But for the first time in a long while, Amara felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing she was not alone. Her story was no longer just her own. It was a beacon for those who dared to dream, to fight, and to break free from the limits imposed by fear and doubt. And in that shared hope, she found her greatest strength. Amara's journey had taken her from the quiet corners of her childhood home to the glaring spotlight of national attention, yet beneath the surface, the battles she fought were often invisible to the world. As her movement gained momentum, she realized that change wasn't just about new policies or better technology, it was about confronting the deeply rooted fears and biases that existed within every corner of the education system and beyond. One afternoon, while meeting with a group of educators at a local community center, Amara listened intently as a teacher named Linda shared her story. Linda had taught for over 20 years in a school much like the one Amara had once attended, underserved, overlooked, and struggling. "I see so many kids like you, Amara," Linda said, her voice tinged with exhaustion and hope. "Kids full of potential, but the system wears them down. It's not just the lack of resources, it's the assumptions. They expect less from them, so that's what they give." Amara nodded, feeling a familiar ache in her chest. This was the very barrier she was determined to break. As she left the meeting, she found herself walking through the neighborhood where she had grown up. The familiar sights brought a flood of memories, friends who had drifted away, teachers who had believed in her, and the moment when everything changed. She thought about the day she was expelled, how it had felt like the world had closed in on her. But now, as she stood on the threshold of change, she understood something vital: the fight wasn't just about her past. It was about every child whose story was at risk of being cut short. That night, as she sat in her apartment, Amara's phone buzzed with a message that would shake her world. It was from a young woman named Jasmine, a student leader from a nearby high school who had been inspired by Amara's work. "I need your help," the message read. "There's something happening at my school, and no one's listening." Amara's heart raced. She immediately called Jasmine, who explained that the school board was planning to cut funding for several programs supporting minority and gifted students. These programs were lifelines for many, and their loss would be devastating. Determined to act, Amara reached out to allies, organized a town hall meeting, and mobilized the community. The fight was fierce. Board members argued budgets, parents voiced concerns, and students rallied with signs and chants. Amara stood at the forefront, her voice steady but passionate. "Education is not a privilege, it's a right. Cutting these programs isn't saving money, it's costing futures." The battle spilled into local media, drawing wider attention and forcing the board to reconsider. After days of tense negotiation, a compromise was reached to preserve essential programs, though the fight was far from over. Through it all, Amara saw the resilience of the community, the power of collective voices rising against injustice. But amid the victories, shadows lurked. Not everyone welcomed her presence. Old adversaries resurfaced, questioning her motives and spreading rumors. Some accused her of exploiting the struggle for personal gain, while others dismissed her as an outsider meddling in local affairs. The attacks were painful, but Amara refused to be derailed. She leaned on Marcus and her close friends, drawing strength from their unwavering support. One evening, after a particularly harsh news cycle, Amara found herself alone, the weight of the day pressing down. She opened her journal and wrote, "Sometimes the battles we fight are not just in the world, but inside ourselves. The fear, the doubt, the loneliness, they come in waves. But so does hope." Her reflection was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Marcus, holding 2 cups of tea. "You don't have to face it alone," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Remember, even the strongest need a break." They talked long into the night, sharing fears and dreams, reminding each other why the struggle mattered. The next morning brought renewed resolve. Amara returned to her work with a clearer vision, not just to fight for change but to build communities that could sustain it. She expanded mentorship programs, connecting students with role models who looked like them and understood their challenges. She advocated for cultural competency training for educators, emphasizing empathy and inclusion. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. One afternoon, Amara received an invitation that surprised her. A request to speak before the state legislature on education reform. It was an opportunity to influence policy on a scale she had only dreamed of. Preparing for the speech, she revisited every story she had encountered, the teachers, the students, the families. She crafted a message that was both a call to action and a testament to resilience. Standing before the legislators, Amara's voice carried the weight of experience and the spark of hope. She spoke not as an outsider, but as someone who had lived the consequences of a broken system and fought to rebuild it. Her words resonated, opening doors to new partnerships and funding opportunities. But the victory was bittersweet. The deeper she delved into the system, the more she understood the complexities, the bureaucracy, the politics, the entrenched interests resistant to change. Still, Amara refused to back down. She reminded herself daily that progress was rarely linear, that setbacks were part of the journey. As the sun set over the city skyline, Amara stood on her balcony, looking out at the world she was helping to shape. The battles were far from over, but so was her resolve. In the quiet of the evening, she whispered to herself, "For every child who's been told they're not enough, I'm here. We're here." And in that moment, the unseen battles felt a little less lonely. Amara never imagined that her journey back to the world she'd once been forced out of would lead her to stand on the verge of something so monumental. Yet here she was, sitting in a sleek, sunlit conference room in downtown Chicago, preparing to meet the board of a major educational foundation that could provide the funding needed to expand her programs nationwide. The stakes felt immense. This wasn't just about money, it was about validation, about proving that her vision was not only viable but essential. The room was filled with influential people, philanthropists, former educators, corporate leaders, all sizing her up. Their polite smiles and carefully measured questions masked an undercurrent of doubt. Amara knew what she represented to them, a young black woman who had been labeled too smart for her school, someone who had defied expectations and was now asking for resources to challenge a system that many preferred to keep unchanged. As the meeting began, Amara felt the familiar adrenaline surge. She launched into her presentation, detailing the success stories from her pilot schools, the tangible impact on student performance and engagement, and the transformative power of community-led education reform. Her voice was steady, her passion palpable. Yet beneath the surface, she could sense the subtle pushbacks, the doubts veiled in questions about scalability, sustainability, and cultural fit. It was the old story playing out again, brilliant ideas tempered by cautious gatekeepers unwilling to fully embrace change. One board member, a man in his 60s with a polished demeanor, leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, your work is impressive. But expanding nationwide requires more than passion. How will you ensure your programs adapt to diverse local contexts without losing integrity?" Amara met his gaze without hesitation. "That's precisely why community involvement is at the core of our approach. We don't impose solutions, we collaborate with local educators, parents, and students to tailor initiatives that respect and reflect their unique cultures and needs." A murmur of approval rippled around the table. But it was clear the battle for full support was far from won. After the meeting, Amara stepped outside, the city's bustle wrapping around her like a cloak. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every step forward was a fight to break through invisible barriers, not just financial but systemic and societal. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus, checking in. "How'd it go?" She smiled, fingers trembling slightly. "Better than I expected. But there's still a long way to go." He reminded her of something she often forgot in the rush, the importance of pacing herself. "Remember, change takes time. And you're not alone in this." The days that followed were a flurry of follow-ups, meetings with potential partners, and strategizing with her core team. Amara's leadership skills were tested like never before, not just in advocating for her vision, but in navigating complex interpersonal dynamics and managing expectations. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Amara sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on how far she'd come. The memories of her expulsion resurfaced, not as scars but as fuel. She thought about the teachers who had doubted her, the principal who'd shut her out, and the classmates who had whispered behind her back. All those voices that once tried to silence her were now echoes drowned out by the chorus of supporters and students she'd inspired. But there was one voice that still haunted her, her own, filled with self-doubt. She realized that breaking through the glass ceiling wasn't just about external validation. It was about overcoming the internal barriers she had carried for so long. The fear that she wasn't enough, that her brilliance was a threat, that her dreams were too big. Determined to confront these fears, Amara sought out a mentor, a seasoned leader who had navigated similar challenges. Their conversations were a balm, helping her reframe obstacles as opportunities and to cultivate resilience without sacrificing authenticity. With renewed clarity, Amara spearheaded the launch of a new initiative, a leadership academy for young women of color in education. The program was designed to nurture the next generation of changemakers, providing mentorship, resources, and a supportive network. The academy's first cohort was a diverse group of 15 remarkable young women, each with their own story of struggle and triumph. Watching them come together, sharing dreams and challenges, reminded Amara of her own journey and the importance of lifting others as she climbed. One student, Tasha, confided in her during a workshop. "Sometimes I feel like I have to choose between being smart and being liked. Like if I'm too outspoken, I'll be pushed away." Amara's heart ached with recognition. "You don't have to dim your light to fit in," she told Tasha. "Your voice is your power. The world needs to hear it." That night, as she lay in bed, Amara reflected on the cycles she was breaking, how her expulsion years ago had been a painful fracture but also the catalyst for a movement that was growing stronger every day. She understood now that leadership was not about perfection. It was about courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to persist despite setbacks. The road ahead would be filled with new challenges, but Amara was ready. She had come too far to turn back. Her story was not just about her. It was about the countless young minds waiting for a chance to shine. And she would be there to open the door. Amara had always known that true change demanded sacrifice, but no one could have prepared her for how deeply that price would cut into her life. As her influence grew and her education programs expanded across the state and beyond, she found herself grappling with battles that were no longer just political or systemic, but profoundly personal. The weight of being the face of a movement, of being the one who was supposed to hold the torch steady while leading others through darkness, fell heavily on her shoulders. Each day blurred into the next with endless meetings, phone calls, and strategizing, leaving little room for rest or reflection. Even the moments she carved out for herself were haunted by the relentless hum of responsibility. Her body ached with exhaustion that sleep could not fix, and her mind spun with the ceaseless pressure to justify every decision, to anticipate every challenge, and to prove beyond doubt that she belonged in the arenas where power was wielded. Her closest friends noticed the change first. Marcus saw it in the hollowed eyes and the brittle smile. One evening, after a community fundraiser where Amara had pushed herself to speak for hours without pause, he finally confronted her gently, "Amara, you're burning the candle at both ends. When was the last time you took a day just for you?" She brushed it off with a laugh, but inside she knew he was right. She felt as if any pause would unravel everything she had fought so hard to build. The fear of losing momentum, of being forgotten or dismissed, gnawed at her relentlessly. Self-care felt like a luxury she could not afford, especially not when so many depended on her. Worse still were the murmurs and whispers spreading in corners she hadn't expected. Gossip seeded by people who felt threatened by her rapid rise. Rumors claiming she was seeking fame rather than genuine progress. Voices suggesting she was too radical, too divisive, pushing too hard and alienating those whose support she desperately needed. Amara tried to silence these voices, but as days passed, their venom seeped into her own thoughts. Doubt crept in like a shadow, twisting her confidence into uncertainty. She began second-guessing her instincts, wondering if she was truly making a difference or just stirring trouble. Every criticism felt like a blow, every harsh headline a confirmation of her deepest fears. One evening, after a particularly scathing article that painted her as an extremist disrupting fragile systems, Amara fled to the neighborhood where she had grown up, desperate for grounding. She wandered the familiar streets, memories flooding in, the laughter of childhood friends, the smell of freshly cut grass in the park, the faded murals that adorned the community center where she had once dreamed of changing the world. She settled on a worn bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and let the cool breeze soothe her racing heart. Pulling out her journal, she wrote, "Am I losing myself in this fight? Is the price of progress too high?" The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but they were honest. As the evening deepened into twilight, an older man approached. It was Mr. Harper, her former neighbor, someone who had quietly supported her since she was a little girl struggling to be heard. His eyes held a gentle wisdom as he sat beside her and said, "Amara, you look troubled." At first, she hesitated, reluctant to reveal her vulnerabilities, but something about his presence invited trust. Slowly, she shared the fears that gnawed at her, the exhaustion, the relentless pressure, the poisonous rumors, and the gnawing question of whether she was enough. Mr. Harper nodded, his voice steady and kind. Change is never easy, especially when you're shaking foundations that many want to keep intact. People fear what they don't understand, and sometimes the greatest battles are those inside ourselves. But remember, strength isn't just about pushing forward relentlessly, it's also about knowing when to pause and care for your own spirit. You're not walking this path alone, Amara. Rest isn't weakness, it's necessary. His words struck a chord deep within her. In her relentless pursuit to fight the injustices that had marked her past, she had forgotten to tend to the wounds the battle inflicted on her own heart and mind. Returning home that night, Amara made a decision that surprised even herself. She resolved to seek balance, to share the load, to trust her team and allies more, and to give herself permission to breathe without guilt. She began delegating responsibilities, mentoring her staff to rise as leaders, building a community of shared effort that could sustain the movement beyond her alone. Slowly, Amara reclaimed parts of her life she had set aside for too long. She spent quiet mornings with Marcus, savoring conversations unburdened by work. She reconnected with old friends who reminded her of who she was beyond the activism. She even took solitary moments on her balcony, watching the city awaken with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. But the struggle never truly disappeared. At a major national education conference, Amara faced a new and unexpected challenge. A prominent figure in educational policy, someone known for his conservative stance, publicly questioned the validity of her programs. The confrontation was sharp, the room divided between supporters and skeptics. The weight of scrutiny was heavier than ever. Yet, instead of retreating, Amara stepped forward with calm determination. She presented the data she had collected, the stories of transformed students, and the voices of families who had seen hope restored. Her authenticity, her refusal to be intimidated, and her undeniable results swayed many, turning what could have been a moment of defeat into a powerful statement of resilience. Backstage, as reporters clamored for interviews and the buzz of media attention filled the air, Amara paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, the endless battles, the moments of doubt, the victories both big and small. She realized that leadership was not about being flawless or unshakable. It was about embracing vulnerability, welcoming criticism, and finding strength in persistence. Most of all, she understood that the cost of change was real and steep, but so was its necessity. The path was never easy, but the promise of a better future for the children she fought for made every sacrifice worthwhile. Standing amidst the chaos, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but so was her resolve. As long as hope burned in her heart, she would keep carrying the torch. Undaunted, unyielding, and unstoppable. The victory at the conference should have felt like a turning point, a moment where Amara could finally breathe and bask in the glow of hard-earned recognition. But as the weeks unfolded, the true complexities of change began to reveal themselves. Success, she learned, was not a destination but a continuous battle, a series of unexpected challenges that tested her resolve at every turn. The momentum she had built attracted new attention, some eager to help, others poised to exploit, and still others determined to undermine her work from within. One afternoon, as Amara sat in her office reviewing proposals for expanding her programs into new districts, a message arrived that shook her world, an anonymous letter accusing her organization of mismanaging funds. The words were sharp and filled with insinuations, suggesting that the donations meant to support vulnerable students were being siphoned off for personal gain. The letter threatened to unravel years of trust and hard work, casting a dark shadow over everything she had fought for. Amara's heart raced as she reread the accusations. She knew the source was likely someone threatened by her influence, but even the possibility of such allegations was enough to cause tremors in the foundation she had built. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, and whispers spread among supporters and critics alike. The media, always hungry for scandal, smelled blood and began to circle. Determined to face the storm head-on, Amara requested a full audit of her organization's finances and welcomed transparency, confident that the truth would clear her name. She gathered her team, her trusted circle, and together they combed through every document, every transaction, leaving no stone unturned. The process was grueling, draining her emotionally and physically, but it was necessary. During this time, Amara felt the sting of isolation. Some allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Friends who had stood by her during past struggles now hesitated, caught between loyalty and caution. Marcus, though steadfast, watched with concern as the weight of the accusations began to erode her energy and spirit. The relentless scrutiny felt like a siege, pressing in from all sides. Yet through the darkness, Amara found unexpected strength. Community leaders who had once doubted her stepped forward, offering public support and sharing stories of the lives transformed by her programs. Parents wrote letters, students testified, and local officials vouched for her integrity. Their voices became a chorus of hope, reminding Amara why she had started this journey in the first place. The audit concluded with a clear report: no wrongdoing, no mismanagement, only a record of dedication and careful stewardship. The allegations were revealed to be baseless attempts to sabotage progress. The media frenzy subsided, but the scars lingered. Amara realized that trust, once broken or questioned, was fragile and required constant nurturing. As the crisis faded, Amara refocused on her mission with renewed clarity. She knew the road ahead would remain treacherous, but she also understood that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, it was about emerging stronger and wiser. She doubled down on community engagement, inviting open forums where voices could be heard and concerns addressed directly. Transparency became her armor, and empathy her guide. Through it all, Amara's relationships deepened. Marcus remained her anchor, reminding her of the importance of balance and reminding her that she was more than her work. Together, they carved out moments of joy and peace, a sanctuary amid the chaos. Amara also reconnected with old friends and mentors, drawing on their wisdom and experience to navigate the complexities of leadership. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Amara sat alone in her office reflecting on the past months. The challenges had been immense, but so had the growth. She thought back to the young girl expelled for being too smart, who had once felt invisible and powerless. Now, standing at the helm of a movement that was changing lives, she realized how far she had come. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. With a deep breath, Amara closed her journal and looked out the window at the city lights. Each twinkle was a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could shine brightly. And as long as that light burned within her, she would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for every child who deserved a chance to dream and to succeed. The aftermath of the audit left Amara with a profound understanding of the fragile nature of trust. Even when cleared of false accusations, the shadow they cast lingered longer than anyone expected. Some community members remained hesitant, their faith shaken by rumors that refused to die quietly. Amara knew that rebuilding trust was more complex than simply proving her innocence. It required relentless transparency, humility, and genuine connection. She committed herself to a new phase of her mission, not just creating change, but healing the wounds that skepticism and fear had inflicted on the people she served. Her focus shifted toward deepening her engagement with the communities she aimed to uplift. Gone were the days when she could operate solely through meetings and reports. Now, Amara believed the future lay in listening, truly listening, to the voices of parents, teachers, and most importantly, the students themselves. She began organizing regular town halls and informal gatherings, where anyone could speak openly about their hopes and concerns. These forums became spaces of raw honesty and sometimes painful truths, but they also sparked moments of shared understanding and collective resolve. One rainy evening, after a particularly emotional town hall in a small neighborhood facing the brunt of educational disparities, Amara found herself walking the slick streets with Jamal, a high school student who had recently joined her initiative as a youth ambassador. Jamal's quiet confidence and sharp mind reminded Amara of herself at his age, eager to prove worth in a world that often underestimated him. "I used to think people like me didn't have a voice," Jamal said softly, kicking a pebble down the wet sidewalk. "But all of this, it's different. It's real. You're showing us that we matter." Amara smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. "That's why I do this, Jamal. Because every kid deserves to know they're seen and heard. We're building something bigger than any one of us." But alongside moments like these, Amara faced the persistent challenge of systemic barriers. Bureaucratic red tape, underfunded schools, and ingrained skepticism from officials who questioned whether real change was possible. Some pushed back against her calls for reform, fearing it would upset the status quo or threaten their own interests. The resistance was subtle but palpable, woven into policies and budgets that made progress feel like a marathon through mud. One afternoon, Amara sat across from a school district superintendent who listened politely but remained unconvinced. "Your ideas are ambitious," he said, steepling his fingers. "But education systems are complex. Change happens slowly, if at all. You have to be realistic about what can be achieved." Amara looked him in the eye, her voice steady but passionate. "I don't want slow change. I want meaningful change, change that improves lives now, not decades from now. Our children don't have the luxury of time." The conversation ended without a clear resolution, but Amara left with a renewed determination. She knew she couldn't win every battle, but she could keep pushing the needle forward, one small victory at a time. Amid these challenges, Amara's personal life became a sanctuary and a source of strength. Marcus remained steadfast, reminding her to celebrate progress and care for herself even when the fight felt endless. Their relationship deepened into a partnership where hope and resilience were shared as equally as love. On a chilly autumn evening, as they walked hand in hand through the city park where Amara had once found solace as a child, Marcus turned to her and said, "You're changing the world, Amara. And you're doing it with heart. Don't ever forget that." Her eyes glistened with tears, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "I'm only able to keep going because of you." Despite the hardships, Amara found moments of joy and laughter that reminded her of the young girl she once was, curious, hopeful, and unafraid to dream. Those memories fueled her resolve, guiding her through the toughest days. One morning, as she prepared for a statewide education summit, Amara received a call that would mark a new chapter in her journey. A leading university invited her to join a collaborative research project aimed at developing innovative teaching methods for underserved communities. The opportunity was a testament to her growing influence and a chance to scale her impact beyond what she had imagined. Standing at the podium months later, addressing a room filled with educators, policymakers, and students, Amara shared her vision with clarity and passion. She spoke not just of reforms and programs, but of dignity, opportunity, and the power of belief. The applause that followed was thunderous, a collective affirmation that change was possible when driven by unwavering conviction. Yet even as accolades came, Amara remained grounded. She knew the real work was done in classrooms, homes, and neighborhoods where challenges were lived daily. Every story she heard, every child she met, reminded her that the fight for equity was ongoing and deeply personal. As twilight settled over the city skyline, Amara reflected on how far she had come from the expelled girl labeled too smart and too different. Her journey was a testament to resilience, hope, and the transformative power of education. With every step forward, she was not just rewriting her own story but opening doors for countless others to follow. And with that, Amara's heart brimmed with quiet determination. The path ahead was long and winding, but she was ready to walk it, one voice, one child, one community at a time. The invitation to speak at the National Education Forum was both an honor and a daunting reminder of how far Amara had come, and how much still lay ahead. Standing backstage, moments before her keynote, she felt the familiar swirl of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about the millions of students who, like her once, were dismissed or underestimated. It was about giving them a voice on the biggest stage she had ever stepped onto. As the crowd quieted, Amara stepped into the spotlight. The faces before her, educators, policymakers, advocates, were eager, expectant. She began by sharing her personal journey, not as a tale of victimhood but as a testament to resilience. She spoke of the day she was expelled, the sting of rejection, and the years of struggle and perseverance that followed. Her voice was steady, imbued with the passion of someone who had lived every word. But the heart of her message was not just her past, it was a call to action. "We cannot afford to let brilliance be a threat," she told the audience. "Too often, our schools punish potential instead of nurturing it. We must transform our education system into one that celebrates every child's unique strengths and lifts those who are marginalized. This is not just an educational imperative, it is a moral one." Her words resonated deeply. Questions flooded in after her speech, many reflecting a genuine desire to rethink long-standing policies and practices. Several influential attendees approached her with proposals for partnerships, funding, and pilot programs designed to bring her vision to life in classrooms across the country. Yet amid the accolades and new alliances, Amara was acutely aware of the personal toll the journey demanded. The relentless pace, the pressure to be a symbol as well as a leader, left little room for rest. She found herself waking in the early hours, consumed by thoughts of the next challenge, the next opportunity, and the persistent question, could she sustain this fight without losing herself? One night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and media interviews, Amara sat alone in her apartment, the city lights casting long shadows on the walls. She pulled out a worn notebook, one she had kept since her school days, a place where she had first dared to dream beyond the limitations others tried to impose. Flipping through the pages, she found a simple phrase she had written as a teenager: "Stay curious. Stay brave." That mantra became her anchor. It reminded her that amidst the chaos, her purpose was rooted in the courage to question and the curiosity to seek new possibilities. It was a reminder that the battle was not only external but internal, balancing ambition with self-care, leadership with humility. In the months that followed, Amara began to intentionally carve out space for herself. She resumed painting, a hobby she had abandoned during the most intense periods of her work. The brush strokes became a form of meditation, a way to process emotions and reconnect with the creative spirit that had always been a part of her. These moments of solitude reinvigorated her, fueling the energy needed to lead with authenticity and resilience. Simultaneously, Amara's circle of support grew stronger. She mentored young activists and educators, fostering a community that shared her vision and values. These relationships brought fresh perspectives and reminded her that change was a collective endeavor, not a solitary pursuit. She learned to delegate, to trust others with parts of the mission, and to celebrate the small victories along the way. The broader impact of her work began to manifest in tangible ways. Pilot programs inspired by her models showed promising results: increased student engagement, improved test scores, and a more inclusive school culture. Stories of students who had once felt invisible now thriving became regular features in local media. These successes, while encouraging, also reinforced the urgency of her mission: there were still too many left behind. Amara's return to her hometown for a community celebration marked a poignant moment in her journey. Walking through the neighborhood streets she once roamed as a child, she saw familiar faces and new ones, children and parents who had been touched by her efforts. The warmth and gratitude she encountered were a balm to the wounds left by earlier rejection. It was a full-circle moment, a reminder that roots and wings could coexist. That evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and purple, Amara stood before a crowd gathered in the local park. She spoke not as a distant leader but as one of them, a product of their hopes and struggles. "This work is bigger than me," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "It's about all of us, our children, our future. Together, we can build a system that sees every child's potential and helps them soar." The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was a collective pledge, a shared commitment to keep pushing for justice and opportunity. Amara felt a surge of hope, a deep sense of belonging and purpose that transcended personal achievement. As the night grew quiet and the crowd dispersed, Amara lingered under the stars, reflecting on the path ahead. There would be more obstacles, more moments of doubt and struggle. But she knew one thing with unwavering certainty: the journey was worth every sacrifice. Because the true measure of success was not fame or accolades, but the lives changed and the barriers broken. With a heart full of resolve, Amara turned toward the future. The road was long, the stakes high, but she was ready. Ready to lead, to learn, and to love fiercely, for herself, for her community, and for every child who deserved to be seen, heard, and empowered. Amara's journey had always been one of transformation, but as she stepped into the next chapter of her mission, she realized that the most profound changes were not always the loudest or most visible. Sometimes, the greatest victories came in quiet moments of connection, understanding, and healing. The community center she had helped establish in her hometown was buzzing with activity one spring afternoon. Children of all ages filled the rooms with laughter and chatter, their bright faces a testament to the promise of a new generation. For Amara, this space was more than just a building, it was a symbol of hope, a place where young minds could be nurtured without fear or judgment. That day, she sat down with a group of teenagers eager to share their stories and dreams. Among them was Keisha, a sharp-witted girl with a spark in her eyes that reminded Amara of herself at that age. Keisha spoke about the challenges she faced in school. The feeling of invisibility, the pressure to conform, the frustration of being underestimated. But she also spoke about the center and how it had become a sanctuary where she could explore her passions freely. Listening intently, Amara felt a surge of emotion. These stories were the true measure of her work, real lives touched, futures redirected. It was a reminder that the fight for equity was not just about policies and programs but about the human spirit. Yet, even as the center thrived, Amara knew that systemic change required persistent advocacy beyond these walls. The broader educational landscape was still riddled with inequities, funding disparities, curriculum biases, and institutional barriers that disproportionately affected students like Keisha. Amara dedicated herself to influencing policy at the state and national levels, leveraging her growing platform to champion reforms that would ripple across communities. One pivotal moment came when Amara was invited to testify before a legislative committee reviewing education funding formulas. The room was filled with skeptical officials and lobbyists, many resistant to change. As she spoke, Amara's voice carried the weight of lived experience and data-backed solutions. She painted a vivid picture of what equitable education could look like, a system where resources matched student needs, where teachers were supported, and where every child had access to opportunities that nurtured their talents. Her testimony was met with a mix of applause and guarded skepticism. But it sparked conversations and pushed lawmakers to reconsider entrenched practices. Though progress was slow, Amara celebrated each step forward, knowing that dismantling systemic barriers was a marathon, not a sprint. Amid the demanding pace of advocacy, Amara found solace in her personal relationships. Marcus, ever her confidant, continued to provide balance and grounding. Their life together was a tapestry of shared dreams and quiet moments, a late-night conversation over coffee, a weekend hike in the nearby hills, the simple joy of being present for each other. These moments replenished Amara's spirit, reminding her that personal fulfillment and public purpose could coexist. One evening, as they watched the stars from their rooftop, Marcus said, "You're making a difference in ways you might not even see yet. But remember, you're human, too. Take time for yourself." Amara nodded, the wisdom in his words settling deep. She realized that her journey was as much about self-discovery and care as it was about external impact. Learning to say no, to delegate, and to embrace imperfection became part of her evolving leadership. Meanwhile, the success stories multiplied. Students who had once been written off began to shine in academics, arts, and leadership. Teachers reported renewed enthusiasm and engagement. Parents expressed gratitude for a community that valued and nurtured their children's potential. Yet, with every victory, Amara remained vigilant. She knew complacency could undo hard-won gains. The work of transformation was ongoing, requiring adaptation and relentless commitment. A new challenge soon emerged when funding for the community center was threatened due to shifting political winds. Amara rallied supporters, organized fundraisers, and launched a campaign highlighting the center's impact. The response was overwhelming, a testament to the deep connections she had fostered and the collective belief in the center's mission. Through this struggle, Amara saw the power of community, not just as beneficiaries but as active participants in shaping their futures. The experience reaffirmed her conviction that sustainable change was rooted in empowerment and collaboration. As the campaign succeeded and the center's doors remained open, Amara stood amidst a crowd of supporters, her heart full. The journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but moments like this made every hardship worthwhile. Reflecting on her path, Amara understood that the true legacy she sought was not just her own success but the foundation laid for generations to come. Her story was intertwined with countless others, children, families, educators, all striving for a future where brilliance was celebrated, not punished. And so, with renewed hope and unwavering resolve, Amara prepared for the next phase of her mission. The road ahead remained challenging, but she was ready to walk it with courage, compassion, and the unshakable belief that change was possible, one life, one community, one step at a time. Amara had reached a pivotal point in her journey where the fruits of her labor were beginning to take shape, but the path forward was anything but smooth. The sense of momentum was palpable, yet beneath the surface, new challenges simmered, testing her resolve and forcing her to confront the complexities of change in a deeply divided world. The national spotlight that had once seemed a distant dream was now firmly fixed on her. Invitations poured in, from universities, think tanks, and advocacy groups eager to tap into her insights. But with the growing platform came scrutiny. Every decision, every word was dissected, and Amara found herself navigating a delicate balance between staying true to her vision and managing external expectations. One afternoon, as she prepared for a televised panel on education reform, Amara felt the weight of it all. The issues at stake were vast: inequities in funding, teacher shortages, curriculum disparities, systemic racism. She knew that the solutions were not simple, and the opposition formidable. Yet, she also understood that this was the moment to leverage her voice to push for meaningful progress. During the live broadcast, Amara spoke with clarity and conviction, sharing stories from her past and the communities she served. She emphasized the urgency of policy changes but also the need for empathy and listening. Education is not just about test scores, she said. It's about nurturing the whole child, mind, body, and spirit. We must dismantle barriers that hold back talent and creativity, especially for those who have been historically marginalized. The response was mixed. Supporters praised her authenticity and passion, while critics accused her of being too idealistic or pushing an agenda. Social media exploded with debates and discussions, some supportive, others harsh. Amara was no stranger to criticism, but the intensity of the backlash stung in new ways. That evening, after the broadcast, she retreated to her apartment, seeking solace in the quiet. Marcus was there, his presence a calming anchor. "You can't please everyone," he reminded her gently. "But the people who matter are listening." His words resonated, and Amara resolved to stay focused on her mission. She realized that leadership meant embracing vulnerability and controversy, knowing that progress often invites resistance. In the following weeks, Amara deepened her engagement with grassroots organizations. She traveled to underserved communities, listening to educators, parents, and students. Their stories reaffirmed the necessity of systemic change but also revealed the importance of local solutions tailored to unique contexts. One particularly moving visit was to a small rural school struggling with limited resources. The principal, a woman named Mrs. Delgado, shared how community involvement had sparked creative programs despite financial constraints. Amara was inspired by the resilience and ingenuity she witnessed, recognizing that change must be both top-down and bottom-up. Back in her hometown, the community center became a hub for workshops and forums where ideas flowed freely. Amara facilitated discussions on equity, inclusion, and innovation, encouraging everyone to envision a future where education was a right, not a privilege. Through these interactions, Amara's understanding of leadership evolved. It was no longer just about her story or her voice but about amplifying others, creating space for diverse perspectives, and fostering collective ownership of change. Amara also faced personal challenges during this period. The relentless pace strained her relationships, and moments of self-doubt crept in. She grappled with questions about her capacity to sustain the fight and whether she was making the impact she envisioned. One afternoon, while reviewing proposals for a new mentorship program, Amara received a call from an old mentor, Dr. Lewis, who reminded her of the importance of self-compassion. "You're carrying the hopes of many," he said. "But don't forget to care for yourself. A leader who burns out serves no one." Taking his advice to heart, Amara began incorporating more balance into her life. She prioritized moments of rest, sought therapy to process the emotional toll, and leaned on her support network. This shift not only renewed her energy but deepened her empathy and effectiveness. Meanwhile, her efforts began to influence policy more tangibly. A coalition she helped form successfully advocated for legislation that increased funding for schools in low-income areas and established pilot programs to support gifted students from marginalized backgrounds. These wins, while incremental, marked significant progress in a system often resistant to change. Amara knew the road ahead remained challenging. Structural inequities were deeply entrenched, and progress was neither linear nor guaranteed. Yet, she felt more equipped than ever to navigate the complexities, buoyed by a community that believed in the possibility of transformation. As the year drew to a close, Amara reflected on the journey from the expelled girl who once felt invisible to a leader shaping national conversations. The evolution was profound, but so was the work that remained. Standing before a group of young activists at a year-end summit, Amara shared her vision with renewed clarity. "Change is hard," she acknowledged. "It demands courage, persistence, and sometimes sacrifice. But every voice raised, every barrier broken, brings us closer to a world where every child's brilliance can shine." The applause was warm and full of promise. In that moment, Amara understood that her story was not just about overcoming adversity but about igniting a movement. One that would carry forward long after she was gone. With the future uncertain but hopeful, Amara prepared to continue her journey, ready to face new battles, embrace unexpected allies, and lead with heart and purpose. Because in the end, she knew the greatest legacy was not just the change she created but the inspiration she sparked in others to keep fighting. The air was thick with anticipation as Amara prepared to unveil the next phase of her vision. Years of groundwork, countless meetings, and relentless advocacy had brought her to this moment. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet tension simmered, a reminder that true transformation was rarely straightforward or universally welcomed. In the heart of the city, a newly established innovation hub was taking shape, designed to be a beacon for young minds traditionally overlooked by mainstream education. Amara envisioned it as more than just a center for technology or entrepreneurship. It was to be a sanctuary where creativity, diversity, and intellect converged freely without barriers. The grand opening was attended by an eclectic mix of supporters, local officials, educators, parents, students, and activists. Cameras flashed as Amara stepped to the podium, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and responsibility. This hub was her promise to the next generation, a place where their dreams would be nurtured, not stifled. As she spoke, Amara's voice rang clear, weaving personal stories with broader hopes. She recounted her own struggles, the isolation, the judgment, the expulsion, and how those experiences fueled her determination. This space is for every child who's ever been told they're too much, too loud, too smart. Here, you belong. Here, you're celebrated. The crowd responded with applause, but not everyone was convinced. Among the attendees were skeptics who questioned the hub's relevance or feared it would divert resources from traditional schools. Some whispered doubts about Amara's methods, labeling them too radical or impractical. Backstage, Amara's team braced for the inevitable pushback, but she welcomed it. Conflict meant conversation. Conversation meant progress. She understood that change often sparked discomfort and resistance, but also opportunity. In the weeks that followed, the hub buzzed with energy and experimentation. Workshops on coding, arts, and civic engagement filled the schedule. Students collaborated on projects that challenged norms and sparked dialogue about identity, equity, and innovation. Teachers and mentors encouraged risk-taking and critical thinking, nurturing an environment where failure was a step toward growth, not a mark of shame. Amara spent hours at the hub, listening to students' ideas and frustrations. She witnessed firsthand the transformative power of belonging and encouragement. Keisha, now a program coordinator, became a shining example, once marginalized, now leading workshops that inspired others to find their voice. Yet, beneath the excitement, Amara knew systemic challenges lingered. Access to technology remained uneven, some families struggled with transportation and time. Funding uncertainties threatened sustainability. The hub's existence, while groundbreaking, was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Amara redoubled efforts to build partnerships with local businesses and philanthropists, emphasizing shared responsibility in nurturing future leaders. She also collaborated with school districts to create pipelines that bridged traditional education and the innovation hub, ensuring no student was left behind. The tension between old and new educational paradigms became increasingly evident. At a city council meeting debating budget allocations, voices rose sharply. Traditionalists argued for preserving established schools and curricula, warning against diverting funds to unproven models. Advocates, led by Amara and allies, pushed back fiercely, citing data and stories that underscored the hub's impact. The debate was raw, emotional, and deeply revealing. It laid bare societal fault lines: race, class, tradition versus progress. For Amara, it was a call to deepen dialogue, build coalitions, and remain steadfast amid polarization. Amid these battles, Amara found strength in unexpected places. Former classmates who once doubted her reached out, offering support and collaboration. Families who had initially been skeptical became champions as they saw their children flourish. These shifting dynamics underscored the potential for transformation through empathy and persistence. One evening, after a particularly intense council session, Amara sat quietly with Marcus. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, but so did a quiet satisfaction. "We're moving the needle," she said softly. "Slowly, but it's happening." Marcus smiled, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone. That's what matters." That night, Amara reflected on the journey from expulsion to empowerment. The path had been littered with obstacles, prejudice, doubt, systemic barriers, but also illuminated by courage, connection, and unwavering hope. She realized that her story was part of a larger narrative about reclaiming spaces for those historically sidelined. The Innovation Hub was not just a physical place, it was a symbol of possibility, a challenge to the status quo, and a promise that brilliance would no longer be punished. As the months unfolded, the hub became a model replicated in neighboring communities. Amara's approach, rooted in empathy, collaboration, and boldness, inspired educators and leaders nationwide. Invitations to speak and consult multiplied, yet she remained grounded in her hometown, committed to ensuring that change was tangible and inclusive. In quiet moments, Amara returned to the memories of her youth. The loneliness, the fight, the expulsion that had seemed like an ending but was truly a beginning. She understood now that setbacks were often disguised opportunities, and resilience the most potent tool of all. The Innovation Hub stood as a testament to that truth, a living, breathing community where young minds could thrive unfettered. And for Amara, it was a reminder that the journey toward justice and equity was ongoing, a collective endeavor fueled by hope, courage, and the unshakable belief that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated. With renewed determination, Amara looked ahead, ready to confront the next challenges and nurture the next generation of changemakers. The story was far from over, but one thing was certain: the girl who had once been expelled for being too smart was now helping rewrite the future for countless others, one bright mind at a time. Amara's journey had reached a critical turning point. The Innovation Hub was thriving, a beacon for those seeking change, but beneath the surface, the stakes were rising. She had entered a world where progress was often met with fierce resistance, and now, she faced a challenge that threatened everything she had worked for. It was a test of everything she had become. The opposition was no longer subtle. Powerful figures in the education establishment, threatened by her growing influence and the hub's success, began to mount a coordinated effort to undermine her work. Anonymous letters circulated, accusing her of elitism and mismanagement. Media outlets ran stories questioning the hub's effectiveness and her leadership. Some former allies distanced themselves, wary of controversy. At first, Amara tried to brush it off, focusing on the students and community. But the attacks grew more personal. Rumors about her past, her expulsion, and even her character surfaced. It was a reminder of the prejudice she had faced as a child, resurrected in new forms. One evening, after a particularly harsh editorial was published, Amara sat alone in her office, the glow of the city outside contrasting sharply with the storm inside. The fatigue she'd been carrying for years threatened to overwhelm her. Doubt crept in: had she made the right choice? Was she ready to face this level of scrutiny again? Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. His voice steady and calm, he reminded her of why she started this journey: to give voice and opportunity to those denied it for too long. "You're not in this alone," he said. "We've faced worse and come through stronger." That conversation rekindled a fire within her. Amara knew that retreating was not an option. Instead, she would face the storm head-on, armed with transparency, data, and the unyielding support of the community that believed in her. Amara called a town hall meeting at the hub, inviting supporters and skeptics alike. The room was packed with parents, teachers, students, and local officials. Tension was palpable, but so was hope. Standing before the crowd, Amara began with honesty. She acknowledged the criticism, the challenges, and the imperfections. "No change is without struggle," she said. "But the impact here is real. Let me share with you the stories that data can't capture." The students who found their voice, the teachers empowered to innovate, the community coming together to rewrite what education can be. She invited several students to share their experiences. One by one, young voices filled the room with stories of discovery, empowerment, and newfound confidence. Parents spoke of children who had blossomed academically and emotionally. Educators testified to the hub's role in fostering collaboration and creativity. The atmosphere shifted. Skepticism gave way to curiosity, and some critics softened. Questions were raised, not with hostility but with a genuine desire to understand and engage. Over the following weeks, Amara launched a series of open workshops and transparent reporting sessions. She embraced scrutiny, turning it into dialogue. The hub's operations became a model of openness, and slowly, trust was rebuilt. Behind the scenes, Amara worked tirelessly to strengthen alliances. She reached out to former adversaries, seeking common ground and shared goals. Her willingness to listen and adapt won over some who had been staunch opponents. Yet, the fight was not without personal cost. The stress took a toll on her health and relationships. Marcus remained a steady presence, encouraging her to find moments of peace amid the chaos. Therapy sessions helped her process the emotional weight of leadership under fire. Amara also leaned on her community. The students, parents, and staff rallied around her, their faith a powerful source of strength. Together, they organized fundraisers, volunteer drives, and public awareness campaigns that highlighted the hub's value and vision. The tide began to turn. Media narratives shifted, featuring stories of success and impact. Local officials expressed renewed support, and additional funding was secured. The hub's model was gaining recognition as a blueprint for equitable education reform. Amara reflected on the journey, the battles fought, the setbacks endured, and the victories won. She understood that leadership meant more than vision. It required resilience, humility, and an unwavering commitment to those she served. Her story had come full circle, from a young girl expelled for being too smart to a leader confronting systemic resistance and transforming it through courage and community. The challenges ahead remained daunting, but Amara was no longer alone or uncertain. As she stood once more before a crowd, this time at a national conference, Amara spoke not just for herself, but for every voice silenced or sidelined. She shared the lessons learned, the power of transparency, the importance of listening, and the necessity of hope in the face of adversity. The applause was not just for her, but for the movement she had sparked. Amara's return had left everyone speechless, not because she had conquered without struggle, but because she had shown what it meant to rise, again and again, with grace and strength. The story was far from over, but one truth was clear. Amara was a force for change, a beacon for those who dared to dream beyond limitations, and a reminder that sometimes, being too smart is the bravest thing of all. The months following the national conference were both exhilarating and daunting for Amara. The recognition she had garnered brought new opportunities but also introduced pressures she had never anticipated. Invitations to collaborate with major educational organizations and tech companies flooded her inbox. Yet, with every new door that opened, the responsibility she felt to her community, the young minds she had vowed to uplift, only deepened. Amara knew the stakes had never been higher. The Innovation Hub was no longer just a local experiment, it was becoming a symbol of what education could be if reimagined with courage and inclusivity. But such influence came with scrutiny. Critics were watching for any missteps, waiting to discredit the movement before it could fully take root. Determined not to be overwhelmed, Amara doubled down on her commitment to transparency and collaboration. She convened a council of students, parents, educators, and community leaders to help shape the Hub's next chapter. Their voices would guide decisions, ensuring the Hub remained true to its mission. One afternoon, as she reviewed the council's proposals, Amara received an unexpected message from a woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter, a renowned expert in education reform. Dr. Carter expressed admiration for Amara's work and offered mentorship and support. This connection felt like a turning point. For the first time, Amara saw a bridge between grassroots passion and established expertise. With Dr. Carter's guidance, Amara refined her vision. They worked together on a comprehensive plan to expand the Hub's reach, including scholarship programs, teacher training initiatives, and partnerships with universities. The plan emphasized sustainability and equity, addressing gaps that even the Hub hadn't yet fully confronted. Yet, as these exciting developments unfolded, a shadow loomed. A sudden economic downturn threatened funding streams. Some longtime supporters withdrew, citing uncertainty. The Hub faced its most critical test yet. Could it survive the financial storm without compromising its core values? Amara convened an emergency meeting. The room was heavy with concern, but also with determination. "We've faced adversity before," she reminded them. "This is not the time to lose faith but to innovate and stand together." They brainstormed creative solutions, crowdfunding campaigns, local business partnerships, and volunteer-driven programs. The community responded with overwhelming generosity. Fundraisers were held in churches, community centers, and even parks. Stories of the Hub's impact inspired people to give what they could, reinforcing a shared sense of ownership. Amara also turned inward, exploring new leadership strategies. She sought balance between visionary goals and practical constraints, learning to delegate and trust others more deeply. This shift was difficult, her perfectionism and protective instincts often urged her to control every detail. But embracing collaboration became a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Throughout this turbulent period, the students remained the heart of the Hub. Their resilience and creativity never ceased to amaze Amara. One project stood out. A group of young innovators developed an app to connect underserved students with tutoring and mental health resources. The project exemplified the hub's spirit, turning challenges into opportunities. As the hub navigated financial uncertainty, Amara's relationship with Marcus also deepened. They found solace in shared struggles and victories, their bond a steady anchor amid chaos. Marcus encouraged her to carve out moments of rest, reminding her that leadership was a marathon, not a sprint. Amara's reflection on this chapter of her journey was profound. She recognized that true change demanded adaptability, humility, and the courage to face setbacks without losing sight of the horizon. The dream that had once seemed so fragile was now a living, breathing reality. Proof that tenacity and community could overcome even the toughest obstacles. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves drifted outside the hub's windows, Amara stood before a new group of students, ready to welcome them into the fold. Her voice was steady, full of hope. "You are the future," she said. "And here, your brilliance will never be too much. Together, we will keep building a world where every smart, passionate mind can shine." In that moment, surrounded by eager faces, Amara understood the profound truth that had guided her all along. Change was not just about individual success but about creating a legacy of opportunity and empowerment for generations to come. Amara stood at the threshold of the hub's grand auditorium, the place where it all began but also where new beginnings were celebrated. Today was the hub's 10th anniversary, an event that marked not just a milestone in years but a triumph over every obstacle she and her community had faced. The room buzzed with energy as students, families, educators, and supporters filled the seats, their faces glowing with pride and anticipation. This was more than a celebration, it was a testament to resilience, vision, and the power of unwavering hope. As she stepped onto the stage, Amara's heart swelled with memories, of a young girl expelled for being too smart, of the pain and isolation she had endured, of the fierce determination that had fueled her return. The journey had been anything but easy. She had faced opposition, betrayal, doubt, and exhaustion. Yet, here she was, surrounded by a community transformed by the very ideals she held dear: inclusion, innovation, and the belief that every mind mattered. Her voice, calm but charged with emotion, filled the room. 10 years ago, I walked away from a place that rejected me. I was told I was too much, that my intelligence was a problem. But today, I stand before you because we chose to turn that rejection into a revolution." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This hub is proof that when we embrace every individual's potential, when we nurture curiosity instead of stifling it, we build something greater than any one of us could alone. The applause was thunderous. But Amara's gaze swept the room, settling on the faces of students who embodied that potential, their achievements, their dreams ignited by a place that believed in them. Among them was Maya, a bright, determined young woman who had overcome her own struggles to lead a groundbreaking community project. Seeing Maya reminded Amara of herself, and the circle of life that education could create. After the speech, as the festivities carried on with music, laughter, and shared stories, Amara found a quiet moment backstage with Marcus. "You did it," he said simply, his eyes reflecting pride and affection. "You didn't just come back, you changed everything." Amara smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment but also a calm acceptance. The journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, new battles to fight, new barriers to break. But now she had a foundation, a family, and a purpose that no setback could shake. Later that evening, alone in her office, Amara reflected on the lessons carved into her soul through a decade of struggle and triumph. She thought of the young girl who once felt invisible and unworthy, and how that pain had become a catalyst for change. She realized that being too smart, too curious, too ambitious, had never been a flaw but a gift, one that demanded courage to wield. The hub's walls, adorned with photos and projects, told stories of growth, resilience, and transformation. Each student represented a thread in a tapestry woven from countless acts of kindness, determination, and hope. Amara understood that her story was part of something larger, a movement toward justice, equity, and the celebration of brilliance in all its forms. In the quiet of that night, she penned a letter to the young girl she once was. It was a letter of love and encouragement, a promise that her future self had kept. "You are enough," she wrote. "Your mind is your power. Don't ever let anyone dim your light. The world needs you, just as you are." Amara's journey had come full circle, from exclusion to inclusion, from silence to voice. She had learned that the greatest victories were not those won in moments of glory but those forged in everyday acts of resilience and kindness. The hub was more than an institution, it was a home, a beacon, and a legacy. As dawn broke over the city, casting golden light through the windows, Amara felt a profound peace. She was no longer the girl expelled for being too smart. She was a leader, a changemaker, a symbol of hope. And with every step forward, she carried the dreams of countless others who, like her, dared to be more. Her story was a reminder: sometimes, being too smart is not a problem to be fixed but a power to be unleashed. And when that power is embraced, it can change the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?